Give me a couple seconds. Let me. The
Is it going to be Beyonce? In my head, it's Beyonce.
I wish we could do all the fun stuff.
Yeah,
but
she's expensive.
We've got like
Okay.
royalty-free silliness.
Smart. Smart. I was just being silly.
Royalty-free silliness, because we're big on all sorts of silliness. If you've seen anything that we've done, you know that's for certain.
I'm like the least horror person.
Now, let's see. And okay, finally. So go ahead and turn on the music now. We should be close.
I like this. It's by Dr. Frankenstein.
Sounds kind of like Nancy Sinatra.
Right? Don't you just want to dance?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
We like to have fun. We're just a bunch of bouncing heads. And we did it.
You did it. We're here.
I love that there was like that great kind of pregnant pause of everyone just being like,
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show. I do apologize. What was happening was I had gone to the Facebook feed, and the audio was on. So it just so happened it was going at the same exact rhythm of the other music. And so I was like, when is she going to turn this off? That's why I kept putting my thumbs up going, anytime. You know, we're doing
we just thought you were having a good time.
I'm like, I'm doing that Dancy Lane used to do on Seinfeld.
I will never, ever get it. Like, there's always going to be something.
It's wonderful. It lets everybody know that we are live and we are silly and serious at the same time. And thanks so much, everybody, for coming to another Hellbent for Horror Takeover, or I Take Over, the Women in Horror Film Festival Facebook page. The link for this is going to be on my page and other pages in a few seconds. And
I did just pin the live to the top of the Women in Horror page, which I realized I don't think I had been doing that, so it should be easy. Anybody who goes to the Women in Horror Film Festival Facebook page, the live event is pinned to the top, so it should be the first thing that you see, and you can join us. And, you know, one of these days I'm going to figure this all out. But it's there.
I couldn't even get my audio working, so I think you're doing fantastic.
Well, thanks. It's hard.
I don't even know who any of you are. So,
exactly. So let's rectify that, because the only people who know who we are is us. So let's get through that little existential nightmare that we're having and that everybody else is having that's watching. Why don't we go around and talk to our authors? Welcome to the literary edition of Hellbent for Horror Takeover. Let's start with Laurel. Laurel, you want to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Laurel Hightower. I am a writer of horror. I have one book currently out through Journalstone called Whispers in the Dark. You know, SWAT snipers and ghosts, good combo. And I have a novella coming out through Off Limits Press with Samantha Koliesnik
Oh, yes.
on August the 10th, and some short stories coming out. And I'm also a podcaster with the Ink Heist podcast.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
And how about Mary Kay?
Hi, I'm Mary Kay McBrayer. My first book came out May 19th. It's called America's First Female Serial Killer. It released on the exactly worst day that it could possibly release. This is the poster. Thank you for complimenting it, Laurel.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Those are real newspaper clippings of like the shit that she did. Can I swear on here? I forgot.
Yeah, you're allowed to swear.
Oh, good. Okay. I was
as much as you fucking want.
Thank you. Please and thank you. Yeah, so that's the first book that I have out. It's about Jane Toppin. She was a angel of death, or like a nurse at the turn of the century, and action-packed with issues. She is, but hard to write, but fun to write. And I also co-host the podcast Everything Trying to Kill You with two of my best friends. Scott was a guest on our podcast.
It was wonderful.
Awesome.
It was so fun. We talked about the autopsy of Jane Doe. And I talked about, both analyzed it and made fun of it, because the performances are great, but there's some other stuff where we were like, what is happening? But it was right after Screaming for Pleasure came out. And I was like, we got to have this guy on. He knows everything.
Yeah.
So those are my two main things.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks so much. And it was so much fun being on your
It
podcast.
was so fun.
And I had never heard of Jane Toppin until I started reading your book. And I love your foreword, where basically you're saying that the reason that you wanted to write it was because you felt a kinship with this woman who went and killed a bunch of people because she was so anonymous during the Victorian time. She was doing thankless menial jobs and she was not invisible. So she just decided, yeah, I can knock these assholes off. And it was like, I thought that was great that you said, this is why I related. And just the doggedness of, you're listening to a podcast, right? And you're like, all of a sudden you hear about this person, you're going, God damn, this is crazy. And you start, the podcast isn't even over yet. And you're already Googling trying to find stuff out.
I had paused it and was like, there's more to this than y'all are saying. Like, people don't just do that without any, do that with no reason. So
I'm out of Tums. Time for a spree. No, maybe not.
Right.
But I love being on your podcast. Another podcast that I really love being on is this smiling fellow over here, Mr. James Sabata. Give us a little bit of background there, James.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an author. I have a book called Fat Camp, which is basically a slasher set in a fit camp for overweight teenage boys. It's a lot of my fears growing up, like Jason coming to kill me or being too fat to get a girlfriend, all mixed together. Tons of masturbation jokes, because what else would I write, right? And outside of that, I have the podcast, thenecronama.com, where we analyze horror films as social commentary. And Scott and Laurel have actually both been guests, so now I have to make Mary Kay come on, right?
Woo! Let's do it.
You will not be disappointed.
You said it. He's recording. You said it into the mic. It's happening.
Well, you'll know.
That's right.
By the time this is over, you'll realize it's a very good deal to get her talking on a microphone. So, I loved Fat Camp. He's giving great elevator pitch on it, but it's what I really loved about it is that it's so different from what he spoke about. There is that humor. There is that thing of what you would expect something called Fat Camp to be, but it's really heartfelt. And it is very emotional, and it really talks about what happens to people where they allow themselves or find themselves in situations where they kind of give up on themselves, and how you can find a way through that and a way through grief. So it's an incredibly, for something called Fat Camp, and it has all the humor that you would expect somebody who is thoroughly self-deprecating to the nth degree to have. All that's very authentic, but then there's a super authentic piece of just this thing of really wanting to get over grief, and how do you get over grief? And so you have all this really interesting stuff that's happening, and now it's being made into a screenplay, which I believe I've been lucky enough to test, kick the tires on, and it's a little bit different. I've got to say, it's funny watching, reading something like the beginning is just like the beginning of the book. But then when you have to try and describe what was going on in your mind as opposed to writing it down in that wonderful way that we tend to write, it was really interesting to see, oh, okay, so he's going right at it. The jiggle factor's right there. There's a big butt crack right in your face. That's where we're going to go. How are you going to get this to feel as heartfelt as the book? So it's an interesting aerial act that you've been doing, and I'm going to have to pause talking to you about it for a second, because we've got this person up in the corner there, very, very important person who will kill me if I don't introduce her. So Vanessa, talk a little bit about what's going on.
Well, you don't need to introduce me. I'm still here every week. I'm just glad that we're getting the opportunity to do these together and talk to all of these awesome people. And it's purely educational for me because, as you know, Scott, there's a lot I haven't been able to experience in the world of film and literature. So this is always good for me, and I have like a running list of stuff I need to watch and read.
Yeah, well, you're only too busy putting on a great film festival, which takes up all your time an entire year long.
It does take some
You have
time.
other concerns. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and changing people's lives, right? Oh, that's all
Right.
you're doing. You're just allowing people an outlet for their creativity, which for some of us is the only reason we didn't kick away that stool, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
I can't say enough for the people who allow creatives to be creative. And I want to real quick just shout out to some of the people who are watching right now. Rick Sarah, a perennial. So great to see these names again. Christian
Yes.
Gant, welcome. And let's see, Kay Wayne Thornley, every week. Thanks so much for showing up. Tiffany Warren, great to see you. Stacy Pippi, one of the co-founders of Etheria Film Night, is here. Magnificent. Great to see her. The great John Arminio, also a podcaster, an amazing font of information for films, as well as comic books, huge on comic books. If he ever wants to come on and just talk comic books, he can come on in here. And Cecilia Abate is here, I believe does Film Scholar, is the writer for Film Scholars. So we have an esteemed group of people out here listening to us. And now it's time to just sound stupid. So I'm going to start the conversation. Because
Yes.
who else is going to start a stupid conversation? First, by saying we may let people in a little bit. So we're probably going to let some people in a little bit. Let us get our head of steam going. But in case, I just posted the rules. If you decide you want to come into the chat room, you have to have your video camera on. We need to see the whites of your eyes if you decide you're going to come in and fuck with us. And any negging, hate speech, general ass hattery, you will get booted from the show. And all sales are final on that. And both myself and Vanessa have really fast trigger fingers. And of course, we'll let you in if we can. It all depends on how the energy is and what's going on. We sure hope that we can get that conversation going. So let's start up by, I think I made a joke, and I'm not sure if I was really joking or not in the marketing. I said, what was the first book you ever stole? And I find that most avid readers, when they were kids, it's even people who come on to be writers, stole their first couple books or went to the library and just said, I want this one forever, and never returned it. So mine was Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbinders in Suspense, which was an anthology series. Yeah, right? So it had the birds in it. It had Daphne du Maurier's version of the birds. So I read that right after seeing the movie and saw how hers was darker. Much more doom-filled. And a couple other, Most Dangerous Game was in there, and Roald Dahl's Man from the South, which may have been the greatest story in that entire thing of great stories, because it's just so cinematic and so short. So who wants to go next? I've just said I committed my felony in third grade, by the way.
It's a perfect age to be stealing. I actually never stole a book. I saw when you posted that, I was like, oh man, like, why didn't I think to ever do that? I just didn't. I legally checked them all out and returned them when I was done. I'm boring. Someone else go. I did sneak books from my mother, though, because she was an avid Stephen King reader. And so I would always go into the office.
Okay, we'll turn into illicit books then. What was the illicit book? What was the forbidden fruit, the first one that you picked?
Yeah, I don't even know that it was really that forbidden. I just, I was kind of one of those kids that when I started reading for pleasure, I was reading a lot of the Ramona Quimby books. I was that kid. I really didn't start reading more horror until I guess freshman year in high school. I got into it a little older. I watched a lot of stuff younger. I read about it later.
How about you, James? I see you percolating.
Yeah, I did steal books. I stole magazines from my father, but we won't talk about those.
Yeah, it's going to be a guy thing. It's going to
Well,
end
we
up being
can
a
talk
guy
about
thing.
those.
No, it's actually a very similar story. That's actually why I said that. So my uncle had a huge collection of old EC comics, and they were all at my grandmother's house. And he'd been moved out for years and years, and I happened to be playing upstairs in her house, and I found the box, and I was like, what is this, And, so all of a sudden I'm reading Tales from the Crypt or Tales from the Dark Side or whatever. And these really crazy things, like, I don't even know, they just had fantastic names, like Amazing Death Bomb or some crap like that. And I stole like 40 of those, but they were already in really bad shape.
Wow.
So by the time I got through them, there's probably like pages at my house, but it's not like I can cash in and make a lot of money off these comics now. But it definitely really affected my writing as well. Like I'm still obsessed with like Creep Show or Tales from the Crypt or that kind of stuff. And I love anthologies all around. And I think that plays a huge part in it. But yeah, those are definitely the first books I stole.
Yeah. In our chat in Facebook, I see Tiffany Warren, another filmmaker. I stole Dean Koontz' House of Thunder. Ooh, so I love that. I was going to say, I hope this isn't a guy thing. It's like, all right, it's mine. I'll take it.
Yeah.
So Tiffany, thank you. Thank you for saving us. Koontz was one of those guys that I didn't think anything of until I read Intensity. And Intensity was like, oh man, what did he eat for breakfast? This thing's amazing. And little things like that can change your attitude about a writer. And it's been interesting, James, that you mentioned that it kind of changed your writing style, because I had this amalgam of all these different guys. First, I thought Alfred Hitchcock was the writer, and then I got this book, and it's like all these stories, and he didn't write a damn one of them.
Yeah, he just has really good taste.
Yeah, he just has really good taste, or his ad agent has really good taste, whatever it was. But I really loved the writing style of Roald Dahl. So I had that for a little bit. And then I really fell in love with Algernon Blackwood. And I really, really fell in love with Harlan Ellison. And so Ellison was like this guy that I think I got his attitude more than anything. The idea of just be fearless. Who cares? Just go in there, get your nose bloody. Who cares? And I found out that was also Bradbury's way of doing things. That's why they were such friends. You would always think Ray Bradbury, the big cuddly teddy bear, 6'4" and everything like that. But he had a doormat in front of his house that said, "If you are a fan, go away." He's like, don't even talk to me. Writer working. He had like writer working placards and stuff. He's like, don't even fucking bother me. But once you did get talking with him, I guess it was really good. So I want to find out, any other larcenists here? Mary Kay, Laurel?
So I didn't steal because I was very worried about the wrath of God, as I continue to be. But when you said the most dangerous game, I remember getting assigned that story in like 8th grade, and my stepdad picked me up from school like he always did, and he was like, what do you have to do for homework? And I was like, I gotta read this short story from our textbook. It's called The Most Dangerous Game. And he was like, that story is dope, you're gonna love that. And I was like, you gotta read The Sniper. The Sniper, it should be on like the next page, because we had like these old it was like the same shit. That one, those two, and also The Lottery. I remember.
Yep.
Yes.
Like in the same month, and being like, this is what I gotta do, y'all. Like.
Yeah, you just named 2 of my all-time favorite short stories. Like, they had a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
Like
they're phenomenal.
Yeah, like The Lottery, when
so great.
This is not like a spoiler because the story's been out for 60 years.
You should know it.
You should know it. Like, it takes you like 20 minutes to read. So pause us, go read it, come back, we'll be here.
Yeah.
But when I just remember being at the end, like, did what I think happened happen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that really, am I fucked up, or is the story?
Yeah.
So I love that. And then I do remember I was a Nancy Drew fanatic because so many life skills, right? Like, don't go somewhere by yourself. Make sure your friends know where you're at. Don't go upstairs or downstairs. You need to have 2 routes of egress. You like,
right.
It's like basic things, but I learned them from Nancy Drew. And I remember my grandmother, that's the Lebanese way of saying grandma. She would find them at flea markets and yard sales. And she got me one that I didn't have, right? Like, she was so good about this. I don't even know how she does it. Even today, I'll be like, I got this great deal. And she'll be like, oh, I got it for less over here. She has like a radar for this shit. But I remember she gave me this book that I had been wanting, and it was a library book. And I was scandalized. I was like, would you return it? And she was like, no. Like, read it and enjoy it. And I was like, well, I'm going to write in it. And she was like, yes, you should. Anyway, I do remember being like, getting a couple of books that way and being like, these are that's the worst thing you can do is like not return someone's book, right?
Yeah.
I buy multiple copies of books that I love.
Yeah. You got to.
I do that for the specific thing of being able to give them away and assume that they're not coming back. It's like there's certain books that I think are unstealable, right? They're meant to be with the person that they're going to end up with, and some of them are interesting choices. But I'm seeing in our comments that Goosebumps was a big theft thing. A lot of people stole,
especially
Goosebumps.
the choose your own Goosebumps. Those are hard to give back because you're never really done.
Yeah. Oh, I'm loving that we were talking about the lottery too. Did anybody read the biography that came out at like 2-3 years ago? Maybe longer than that now.
I saw the movie.
Shirley Jackson. I haven't watched the movie yet. I have to watch the movie.
I think it's good.
Yeah, the book is so good. I mean, it's super depressing, but it's wonderful to hear how you're talking about the lottery, how you felt, because when that came out in Vanity Fair, they got a lot of letters. Because people didn't know, what the hell is this about? What happened here? And she refused to tell ever, because she's like, that's the point, is that you should be feeling that, especially feeling that when we're in the time period that we're in the late 50s. And so she really was revolutionary in what she did on that. And I still, love not only the lottery, but for me, it's the first paragraph of The Haunting of Hill House. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed to, by some, to dream, but Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against the hills, holding the darkness within. That is so fucking awesome. And then it ends with, whatever walked there walked alone. Like, okay, do we need to read the rest? Well, yes, we do. It's like that. There are very few chapters that I can think of, or beginnings of books that I think have that kind of thing. Fear and Loathing would be another one that when you read it, you're like, oh shit, okay, put on the seatbelt, here we go. But I absolutely love Shirley Jackson on that. But Laurel, I don't think we've heard from you. So what was your...
I was not, I didn't steal. But in large part that had to do with the fact that, we could have been straight up broke, like no money for groceries. And my mom would have been like, anyways, we're going to the bookstore. So there was never any reason to. And I remember going to the library with like these stacks of books and having this ridiculous late fee of like over $50 once. And she just, without a blink, just writes a check. So there just was never, so I definitely snagged books off of her shelves that they never really put rules on what I should be reading, but this is how you get an 8-year-old asking what getting laid means and stuff like that. And so you just kind of deal with that when it comes up.
I love hearing that kind of thing, because I came from a family that was functionally illiterate. My dad was functionally illiterate. He saw books as homework. And he saw them as toothless. So that allowed me to get all sorts of corrupted, because he thought all books were like the books that he read in high school, and that they were just going to be that level of stuff. And so like he let me get the copy of The Towering Inferno, because I love the book, the movie, The Towering Inferno. It was based on 2 books, The Glass Inferno and The Towering Inferno. And there's so much sex in those books. There is sex from every floor. There is sex in that building. And my dad had no idea. He's thinking, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen are running through the flames, and that's it. And I'm reading, I'm finding out words for things. I'm like, I need a dictionary. And I got a dictionary too. And my dad had no clue, because it was like no books were ever bought. He bought me books when I was grounded, because I got grounded a lot too. And he would let me get comic books, a whole bunch of those. And then I started getting the heavy duty books. And it's funny that you mentioned, saying things like get laid to your parents and having them have to explain stuff. My dad would not. So I knew better than to go to him with it. But I remember my first thing of violence was finding my grandfather's The Saint books. And I forget who is the author of The Saint now, but they were very old-fashioned books, but they had wood carving pictures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had old wood carving pictures in there, and they were all butts and breasts and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God! And then
that's it, butts and breasts.
and then I turn a page, and the line was, and I remember it to this day. He snapped his neck like a dry twig, and I'm like, I'm in heaven. Where's been all my life? Where books are amazing. And so it was really a place for me to really have lots of my transgressions come through. And I think that's one of the things that for me was very freeing. A lot of movies I couldn't see. Growing up in the 70s, The Godfather was in the theaters. The Exorcist was in the theaters while I was alive. Couldn't see those. And Jaws was in, and I did see that, and it scared the hell out of me. But I also got to read the book. Tons of sex. I'll tell you, what's her name? The wife in that thing, Brody's wife. Total. Oh my God, she's just all over that book. Sex. My dad had no clue. But the thing is, those books really let me get past the chains that my family had on me. Very much believing Armageddon was coming next week. Very much believe that demons were in the house and that they were there because I sinned. Everything was a sin. And the morals were just crazy high. And they were pretty much revolutionaries in the opposite way of how we think of revolutionaries. They're like the most conservative revolutionaries ever. The rest of the religions were all fake, because they didn't go into the Word of God literally enough. And so it was a really, really crazy life. And then reading The Exorcist was galvanizing, terrifying, scarring, and freeing. And that's where I think that Harlan Ellison came in for me, was that he freed me by basically bringing all these taboos. Again, Dangerous Visions. The Dangerous Visions series that he had was a series that he was the editor of, and he told all of the writer friends that he had who were getting censored in every magazine that they did, he goes, give me your worst story. We're going to put them all in there uncensored, and let's see if we get banned. If we get banned, big deal. But we're going to make the book about that. And so they didn't get banned because the book was about that. And you don't ban something that's saying, fucking ban me, motherfucker. And so the book was so great. And it basically had these stories in it that were all the questions that I had that I couldn't say out loud about my life and religion and God and family and abuse. All those things were right there in front of me, told me that other people felt that it wasn't just happening to me. And there was something absolutely amazing to finding writing. It was the quiet revolution. Reading is the quiet revolution. You allow people to escape every day.
It's the discovery of writers too, who find a way. I mean, like what you said about feeling, realizing that other people feel the same way. Because to me, like childhood was it just felt really isolating, in large part because I didn't speak. I don't know why. I just never said anything. So if I was bothered by something, I never said anything. If I was worried, I never said anything. I never told anybody. And I felt, just like the weirdest nerd, like that everything I thought and felt was just, I was the only one and I was this freak. And yeah, when you're reading and you start coming across authors who are good at putting the human condition in relatable terms, to where you can read something and say like, oh yeah, okay, this person feels the same thing I do. This person has seen the same things that I have. I think those are just treasures to come across.
Oh yeah.
Do you have a book, any of you, that if you see that someone's reading it, you go, my kind of person, I must go talk to that person?
Multiple.
Yeah, I have a bunch of those books.
Well, spill the beans.
Yeah, what are they?
I want to be like, yes, I do, me first. Anytime I see somebody reading Toni Morrison, I'm like, we can be friends.
Mm-hmm.
She's my favorite. I also really love Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in particular, his scary book of Love and Other Demons,
Yes.
which Right?
Yes.
I discovered this maybe like 2 years ago, and I was like, what the fuck? You guys buried the lead on this. And it's so scary because it's just, it takes place during slavery in Colombia, which is like the worst shit anyway. And then you have this little girl whose parents have stopped caring about her. So the slaves in the home are raising her. And then when the one who is basically her mom dies, they're like, she has rabies, but she's really just, she's just enacting West African traditions, but she's a white girl. So it's like, it's weird. And they think she's possessed. And then her exorcist falls in love with her. And just anybody who can like stay with me that long to describe that book, I'm be friends. It's just cascading failures, right? Like there's no redemption in it at all. Like it's all shit all the way down. And
wow.
Yeah, I think I have that in my book.
Real disturbing. I'm like, we can be friends because I'm gonna go there. Like I can do it in like 2 moves, right? I can get to something disturbing in like 2 moves. So if you're already reading about it, then we can be friends.
I think I list that book in my book when I have my literature page. I was like going, oh, I got to put this. A couple I had to like sit there and say, now I'm going to throw a curveball in there, see who has it. So it's.
But see, that's how I knew we could have you on the podcast because I was like, yep, we're good. Talk about these things. You had Carmen Maria Machado on there too. I remember.
Yes.
Because I was like, oh yeah, I'm so obsessed with her. I want to be her friend so bad. So cool. Man. And she has a comic coming out too. I know you said someone listening was.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if John Arminio's out there, if he wants to come in. John Arminio, if you're out there, feel free to try and come in.
I thought I saw him pop up.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put in the Zoom meeting out there. I think we're
let people join us.
Yes, let's see how fast that devolves. Let's see. What else? I guess James or Laurel, have you chimed in on that?
I mean, so I'm very awkward in real life, as you know, because you've met me. But like, if I see somebody reading a book that I'm really into, I have this thing where I want to talk to them about it, but I usually don't. And part of it is that I don't want to interrupt them while they're reading this greatness.
True.
And part of it is that I'm like, I'm totally going to mess this up. And then I get all stuck in my head and I'm like, they're going to think I'm weird and then only weird people like this book and then they're going to stop reading it. But
how you really go to a place.
I do, yeah. That's how we got there in Fat Camp, right? But no, the one time that's totally not true was actually a comic. So I think it's funny that kind of fits in. But Joe Hill's Lock and Key is like my safe space, basically. It's one of my favorite stories, let alone favorite comic. And I saw a guy reading it and I had to know. I was like, have you read the whole thing? Like, is this your first time? Like, you know, and we actually became really good friends because it was like his 17th time reading it as well. And that's what we bonded over. So maybe I should just take more chances is my point.
Yes, you should. You should.
You said Carmen Maria, and I'm sorry, did you say, is it Machado or Machado?
I think it's Machado because it's Machado. It's okay. Cuban, right? So it has the Spanish.
Okay, I'm from Kentucky, so I butcher like everything. So I tend to like to ask if I can. So okay, but yeah,
I think that's right. I think that's right.
But yeah, she the Her Body and Other Parties.
Yeah.
And in particular, I mean, like if I see that book, I'm just gonna stop and be like, so the husband Stitch.
Yes, let's talk about it.
Because it's just,
that's on my, that's on my list. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's so good. Yeah. That one. And Joe Hill, actually Heart-Shaped Box. I love that book.
Yeah.
And also I hate to go there, but Stephen King, 11/22/63.
Oh.
I love it so much. And it's such a departure.
Yes.
So it's like, I got it from a girlfriend who was like, okay, no, you're going to love this. And it's like the conversation we had after that was just nothing but like, right. I know. And then, yes, just that kind of thing. So
I recommend that to a lot of people all the time who, just think of him as this kind of like one trick horror writer. And I'm like, check this one out because it's going to surprise you. It's so well done.
Yeah, it's so
Obsessed.
funny about King because from the very beginning, I mean, King by 1981, I think he had different seasons out there, which only has one horror story in it. And he had always been kind of changing it up a little bit. He always hit me as, and I think he used to get called this a lot because he was such a populist, right? And because he was so popular. And that was Dickens. He was always being compared to Dickens because there was this genre love, being able to lean into different genres. But yeah, I love a lot of these books that we're talking about already, and really happy and excited about some of the names being popped up. And it looks like we have John Arminio. I believe all we have to do is mention Joe Hill, and John Arminio is going to appear.
Yeah.
Hey, John. I really like Horns because that was just so audacious. I liked Heart-Shaped Box a lot because it was like, but it reminded me of his father. The thing about Horns is that it had a rich anger that was just where King, the father, would sometimes hit. And I was really I was shocked at where Horns ended up going. And I was like, oh, I'm really into this book. So that's the one out of the Hills that I really, really appreciate. But Lock and Key is fun. And well, since we're talking about books that can really pin your ears back, I wasn't a huge fan of Jack Ketchum, some of his books, but I will say the ones that he did do that affected me angered me more than they did entertain me, and yet I couldn't shake them. And it would be The Girl Next Door, which is really, really rough, based on a true crime that happened. And he just plays it all the way through, and he puts you in the position which of the people who abuse this girl that ends up coming into their lives, a family, kids that are abusing this other child because the mother is just as she is. But it's such a smart move because he puts you in the position of knowing what's going on. And that is the only reason that family was able to do what they did, is everybody else minded their own business. There were problems all around. And then it was just that time in America where you didn't talk about what was going on with kids. And so he puts you right there. He puts your nose right in it. He makes you as irresponsible as you continue to read on. I told him that much when I met him, and I made the mistake of saying that I had stolen a book. He's like, "All right, everybody should steal their first book." He said, "I stole my first book." So it was fun, but he's now gone. So John, since you're on, what's up? What do you want to bring to the party here?
Well, yeah. Since you guys brought up Lock and Key, that's a series that actually has become more meaningful to me as the years have gone by, because one of my good friends, he actually had a tattoo project where he was getting every single key tattooed around his arms and around his legs. But unfortunately, he was somebody who had sort of like a mounting series of illnesses. And so as he was getting more keys tattooed, he got sicker and sicker. And unfortunately, he passed away last year. But, he had this kind of physical reminder of his illnesses in the keys. And there's just so much death and tragedy in that book. And so that book is now just so intertwined with my friendship and experience with him. And so, like, in retrospect, it's even more powerful for me. And even on my first read, it was incredibly engaging. One of my favorite horror stories in horror comics. So.
And I love horror comics. I'm glad. I don't know if you were on earlier. Pardon me. I get my coffee. The thing that keeps me alive here. But James was talking about how he was immersed in EC Comics. And for me, it was creepy and Tales from the Crypt and the DC ones that came out at that point. And man, they were amazing. And I remembering the artistry that was in them as well. And that's one of the things that I think is great. And I think Lock and Key had some great art as well in those books. So a lot of interesting stuff on there. How about, I wanted to talk, has anybody read Paul Tremblay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
House at the End of the World, or Cabin at the End of the World.
Yes.
What an amazing book. I was hoping everybody had read it because I love that book. And that is one that just splits people right down the center. You know, people are like, I
on
hate
the
that book.
list.
Yeah. People hate that book, and I love it. I think it's just, for this time period, it is a magnificent book for this moment in time. And I think it just, of course, it has more questions than it does answers. And it's for those cinephiles out there, this is like a headier and more spiritual version of Funny Games, the movie Funny Games. There's a really, really interesting look at sacrifice. And what sacrifice means, and what the idea of what you would do for society, and what society owes you, and what we tend to do in labels when we're labeling people. And it's really, really intriguing. I love that book, and I know he's got another one out that I'm behind on. I also love Lauren Bucas. I don't know if anybody's read Lauren Bucas, but she's something else. She's a South African writer, and you'd never know it, because the book that I love of hers is Broken Monsters, and it's all set in Detroit. And you would think she grew up, raised in Detroit. Her the research that she did is impeccable, because I have friends who live out there, and I was like, oh man, obviously she knows all this stuff. But it's such a great. Her stories are really neat. She has another book called The Shining Girls, and that's a story that, it's kind of like, there was an old movie called Time After Time, where H.G. Wells is following Jack the Ripper to San Francisco, modern day San Francisco. This is a murderer who is traveling through time, and the person's trying to catch them. And they're using old crime scenes. It's like evil places allow him to pop through time. So he'll go from one murder site to another murder site.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's really, really intriguing. And it just has this great buildup. But the Broken Monsters is really making a literal monster out of the media that we ingest, and how we give energy to bad thoughts. And so it's really, really cool, using Detroit at a time when Detroit was just starting to come out from under the 2008 destruction. And the artists are starting to come back, and everything is in ruins. But what I really thought was great about that book, and courageous, it was the first book that I ever saw where they tried to recreate what it's like reading social media. So there are entire pages that are YouTube comments, and the story actually changes because of the comments that people are leaving. You're thinking one thing about a person, and then someone else comes in and says something rude, and everybody kind of builds on that, and you start to find out secrets about that person and links to other videos. It was really, really intriguing, and using that in a way that wasn't so in your face. It just kind of, it was the first time I ever saw anybody use that shorthand, which you'll now see in films, where all of a sudden now you have the pop-up of the text window saying, meet me. But it used to be where that was like lazy, and somehow turning that laziness into an actual art that worked. I really give her a lot of credit for that. And it's creepy, creepy, creepy book.
Yeah. We have a couple of comments. Waylon Jordan said that The Cabin at the End of the World really messed him up.
Oh.
Which makes it even more intriguing now. I'm going to order it while we're chatting. And Christopher G. Moore said that he really enjoyed Joe Hill's short story collection, 20th Century Ghosts.
Yeah, that was good too.
Ooh, that's cool.
I got to buy some books, man.
Just heads up on Cabin at the End of the World. Do not start it like right before you go to bed.
No.
It ramps up the tension within like 2 pages. You're just like,
be up all
don't do it before you have to do something peaceful.
Yep. I just got chills. Yeah. Laurel, you just gave me chills, because when you mentioned that, I started hearing the sound of the footsteps on the crushed gravel.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I'm
God,
like,
you guys are getting me.
Shit.
Yeah. He is just a master class in that sort of, just the ability to do that without, there's never any cheap tricks with it, like
No.
it's tension, and so his latest one that just came out is Survivor Song, or I guess it's coming out.
I think it's next week. The 14th.
Next week. We had him on our podcast this past weekend, and so we had gotten advanced reader copies of it, and that is another one. I texted one of my co-hosts, Shane. I was like, man, I don't know what I was thinking. It's 10:30. I started this book, and now I'm just not going to sleep. Like, it's just not a thing. So it's just his ability to do that, to pull you in immediately. and to just create that tension. And I think part of it is the way that he pulls you into the character so quickly.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm getting it. Seriously, I'm gonna gift myself the book.
Well, especially with Cabin, because the people that you meet in the first couple of pages, it's so wonderful. The banality of how a situation can change. The banality of evil is said an awful lot, but I don't know if that's the right word to use with what happens in that one sequence. But there is this sense of sorrow that comes up, and then this sense of danger, and it starts creepy, and then it starts getting a little strange, and then it gets really disturbing and sorrowful. It's really something else, and I love when a writer definitely just fucks with me like that. And I see scars and other distinguishing marks by Richard Matheson. K. Wayne Thornley brings up was a one library book he accidentally on purpose lost. And I love that. And Richard Matheson, rest in peace. He has recently left us as well. And it looks like Edward Santiago says he would be evil. He would go to people, the reader of a book that he had already seen, go, "Oh, did you get to the part where the killer gets Debbie? I'd have to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then another Richard Matheson mentioned Hell House. Christopher G. Morey said is a favorite supernatural horror novel of mine. I remember that one. I loved that one as well. Carrie Yates, Flowers in the Attic scared her. Those were really big. I don't know if this is just a generational thing, but those books were really popular when I was in middle school. It seemed like they were all getting, passed around, and everyone was just so into them. And I remember when that movie came out, I actually watched the movie before I read the book.
I always do that.
Don't do that. No, don't do that.
I have to do that because otherwise I'm going to be watching a movie like this isn't how it happened in the book.
Yes.
Well, it's,
I think I can't enjoy it.
To speak to that, it's interesting because I think, reading is such a personal experience. It's just you're the singular audience, right? You're reading this. Everyone's imagination is different. Everyone's going to have different interpretations and be affected by it differently. And whatever we conjure up in our minds is never going to be really the vision of what's given to us by someone else. And I think that's probably why people always say the book is always better, because nothing's going to really kind of compare to what you're envisioning for it.
Yeah, nothing is better than my imagination.
Bro, well, right? I mean, because that's how we're it's going to be the best that you would make it.
Yeah. Well, not all, there is that whole thing of bad books make good movies, and good books make bad movies. I'm not necessarily sure that I would say that's a constant, but I have seen that. I've seen that with, like Jaws is a terrible book. I mean, Jaws is just boring and dry and stupid. And there's just these, and Carrie is a great book, but it's not a film. They're two completely different entities. I mean, Carrie is basically, if I remember correctly, it's like newspaper clippings and first person discussion of the action. He had like this really weird thing. And the end is her, she gives mom a heart attack, slows her heart down and kills her. And so you can't do that cinematically. That's going to be a nightmare. And so you have an entirely different work of art come out of Brian De Palma. And so I think one of the, has everybody read The Birds? DeMarier's The Birds as well?
I have not read that.
It's been a long time for me.
I love bringing that one up because that's two masterpieces in two different mediums. It's one of the very few times that both the book, the story itself, holds up on its own as almost an entirely different entity than the movie, and the movie itself holds up. I mean, it's dated and everything, but the idea, the concept, where Hitchcock goes with that, and just the idea that Hitchcock did something. I think the thing that nobody talks about with that movie is that there's no soundtrack. It's all electronic sounds of birds and stuff. So it has this whole unnerving feel to it. And both of them take something that's relatively absurd. Birds attacking you sounds ridiculous. Until you go by a tree that has 50 birds in it, you don't know it, because they're all quiet, and then all of a sudden they all go up and you're like, oh shit.
Don't like that.
Geese are intense, man. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. They
right.
scare the hell out of me.
An
Oh,
army
they're
of
big.
geese.
They're bigger.
They are, but do yourself a favor if you ever want to just really have a satisfying experience. If you take an umbrella, there's like a duck pond park, but there's a bunch of geese, and we were taking my very small son to it. My husband was like, "Oh, get the umbrella, you're gonna want it." And it was like holding a Tommy gun. It was like, they came right at us. They were like, and I was like, boom, and they just ran off. And then the rest of the time we're there, he's got the stroller, and I've got this thing like, don't start nothing, won't be nothing, and it was so fun, so yeah, it's very enjoyable to frighten geese that come at you.
I love it. All I can
Geese
think
are
of.
mean anyway.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of the assholes of the birds. I mean, they're not.
Right, and that's saying something because birds are assholes. They're dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs, exactly. That's the
They
problem.
are.
They're like, fuck you, I'm a dinosaur. I'm the one that
Yeah.
survived the meteor.
That's right. I've been here. This is my shit.
Yeah, don't mess with them.
Oh, someone brought up World War Z. The book is way superior to the film. I think the film's a completely different animal. I don't hate the book or the movie, but it is certainly not the book. But the book is also, I thought so highly of the book. And then I went and met, oh my goodness, how can I know that? He did V Wars, and I can't think of his name all of a sudden. Jonathan Mayberry. Yeah, Jonathan Mayberry.
Oh.
And we're sitting talking about the book, and he goes, it's just such, it's wonderful. The Battle of Brooklyn, right? Or I think it's the Battle of the Bronx, is it? Where they're all going towards the bridge. And that's when we lose the war against the zombies, because they start using these concussion bombs and everything, which would normally destroy an army of living people, but it does nothing except put holes in zombies. So before they know it, they're outnumbered and stuff. And Mayberry's like, that would never happen. All you do is set fire to them. That'd be it. He goes, set fire to them, and that would be the end of the whole book. So he just kind of waylaid. He goes, and even if they blew him up, and he goes, what you do? You just have two Huey helicopters with two Huey helicopters behind them. Let the first two Hueys empty their payload, and then let those two go away, and let the other two. And before you know it, there's no zombies there. There's not an unlimited supply of zombies in the Bronx. And so I was like, shit. And that's where, of course, it's creative license, right? Because what Max Brooks is really talking about is how there is an inevitability to losing a war. Technology isn't going to win you a war. That sooner or later you're going to underestimate the human element. And this was the zombie element, but I believe that's what he was trying to go to, that you would feel superior because you have superior firepower. But the reality is, time and again through history, we see the superior firepower, the larger army, not end the insurrection. But it just didn't work in the logic sense, I guess. But I thought the book was pretty fun.
I haven't checked out that book. I might have to. We have some more comments. Kay Wayne said, birds are assholes. I want the t-shirt. Maybe I'll make one. I like to make stuff.
Too.
I want
Yeah, I'll put it up. Total sparkles. Birds are assholes.
V-neck.
Yes, please. A V-neck,
Yes,
please.
absolutely.
Good call.
Nathan Andrew Leaflight, oftentimes when an interesting book or graphic novel is coming out as a film, I get excited and rush out and read the book. But then when the trailer for the film comes out, I'm often so disgusted by what they've done to the book that I won't even bother to see the movie. I get that. I mean, that's a strong feeling that he has. I don't know if I've ever been like horribly offended by such things, but I have seen some pretty poor adaptations, kind of making me wonder, like, who signed off on this?
Yeah.
Especially when the book is so strong, and then you've got something. I'll give you a more recent example, and you guys are going to hate me because I'm going to keep using Stephen King, but I can't help it. It's what I know. But when they just redid Pet Sematary, I don't understand I was mad too. I don't like any of the changes they made, and I don't know why they did it. They should have just named it something else and been like, inspired by the book and then did something else. I didn't like it at all.
Yeah, I'll reserve my comments till everybody else is done about that, but I will come back to Pet Sematary because, oh my God.
I just, I don't know. I mean, I was just in such like, this was the face I made watching the movie.
I had the absolute inverse with American Psycho. I really hated American Psycho. I thought American Psycho was, I get what he was trying to do. I got the satire, but it was just numbing. One chapter would be nothing but name dropping of brands and talking about his love for Huey Lewis or whatever, and on the page it just laid there. And then the next thing was him killing a blind man's dog and then cutting his eyes out, and then going back to the idea of talking about whatever. And I was like, every other chapter was an atrocity, and then there was this banal atrocity, and I was like, I get what you were getting at, but Brett, this fucking sucks.
I couldn't get through it. I got like through the first half, and I was like, this is not for me. But I loved the film.
The movie works by almost. I think she hated the book, and it was like, how do I make this book sing? And it really was almost a commentary on how that book fumbled. And
the Starship Troopers approach.
Yeah, kind of the Starship Troopers. That's actually a very astute. Yeah, I like that. Because another book that I think of that sometimes with Lovecraft things as well, like The Color Out of Space, which you have women and African Americans put into a story that's really pretty heavily racist, and you have a guy who has these racist overtones, and then you take it and you put that into it and you make it a commentary on that just by having those folks in a story that used to have that. I think it's very interesting that you take movies like Dagon that took a Innsmouth, which is another one that talks about the other in a way that sounds great until you find out how racist he was, and then you're like, ooh, man, that's kind of nasty. And then you make a movie that really kind of comments on that. So I think that's actually pretty astute stuff. And the thing about Pet Sematary, well, anybody else want to talk about Pet Sematary before I go into it? Because fuck, Pet Sematary is one of those books. And because what Pet Sematary was about, the original story, the idea of a man's heart is stonier, and the idea of this, he's the Walter White of the 80s, the Gage, Louis Creed. He's this angry white guy who's pissed off at everybody because his life didn't go the way he wanted it to. And he has all this resentment. He's ready to leave his family and all this. And every problem that happens is caused by his wantonness. And they all die for it. He's the one left there. And I was like, this is a great idea. This is fantastic. Talking about that vengeful thing, all the resentment. And then the new movie's like, he's a bro. I don't know. My wife's afraid of death. I had to do it all. I couldn't believe how much they turned it into this thing of like the woman was hysterical. Mom's a hysterical person. He's the religious one. He's put down. He's put upon. He must do it. It's just, oh man, I couldn't believe how they passed the buck in that. And then to have it end the way that it did, I was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. So take everything that was important about that book, everything that was interesting, the only reason that it had that telltale heart kind of power to it, and just remove it and turn it into, women these days. That's what I felt that movie was. It's like, I can't believe it.
It felt like very much studio pressure to have a likable protagonist and how that could just sink, especially a horror story.
And he wasn't likable anyways.
Right.
Yeah. Because they failed in that as well. And I actually didn't even finish that one. I got fairly close to the end and I just kind of gave up. This is silly, but the scene that really just irritated me the most was him brushing his daughter's hair in the bathtub, because I'm just going like, if you've had a daughter for any period of time, you're already ripping her hair out by it. Just, I don't know. I know that's silly, but I was just like, put the comb down. Who wrote this scene? This is terrible. Of course you're tearing her scalp out.
I noticed that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
I don't have a daughter, but I was like, wait, that doesn't look right at all.
No.
It was all wrong. All of it.
Yeah. If she's dead, then roll with that. Don't rip her staples out, for God's sake. That's just terrible. I know that's a weird thing to get stuck on, but I was just like,
it's amazing.
It was filled with little things like that, though, that just, I don't have words. I'm speechless with it. It just was a waste of time and money.
And what really bothered me about it was that I love the first film of those guys. The movie is Starry Eyes, and it is a lower budget version of Neon Demon done better. The idea of what price fame and the cannibalistic level of celebrity. And I thought it was just magnificent what they did. And Alex Esso was the actress who was the lead in that, and she was magnificent. I thought she should have been nominated for an Oscar for her acting. And it was just such a smart, heartfelt, character-driven, independent horror film. And then to see them do, I thought, wow, I can't wait to see what they do with Pet Sematary. And it's like, I can't even believe that these are the same guys that ended up doing that. So it was really, really sad and shameful as far as I was concerned. What do you think is an unfilmable book?
Unfilmable.
Yeah. What do you think is like, you can't film that? Like I used to think Dune, but then Dune got done.
Well, I'm going to need a minute on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess when you say unfilmable, are you kind of referring to maybe that the subject matter being so difficult to deal with? How on earth could you possibly like film it and get it across? Or is it something that, I look at a lot of...
Could be multiples, right? I mean, it could be style. Confederacy of Dunces, right? All told in this one way, that if you don't get that voice, there's no story. It's just a guy walking around.
Right. I feel like most of Faulkner is like that, but James Franco keeps trying to make it into movies, and I just get so mad at him because he does all the things that I want to do exactly the opposite of the way that but yeah, because so much of his writing is, I mean, I know that that's not technically horror, but
we can go off the rails.
Yeah, we don't care.
So I definitely think like his stuff, because he's a screenwriter, right? Like if it's going to be on film, he knows how to make it go on film. Like the form dictates the content, because he can do them all. So that, and then there's also a movie that the film adaptation of the book Perfume: The Story of a Murderer. Because so much of the sensory description is smell, and so when he talks like the smell of lilacs, when you're reading it, it's like lilacs. She smells like lilacs and peach, and then like it's like someone describing a wine, right? Where it's like, yeah, I get that too, or at least like I can kind of conjure what you're saying. But when it's on screen, it's like a picture of lilacs floating.
Right. Because how do you translate those senses,
Yeah, so that was a movie I did not, I mean, the movie's not like bad. It's just not, it's not good enough to be that book, because that book is bomb. So yeah.
I felt the same way about the Preacher TV show.
Oh yeah, God, I hated what they did with it.
Yeah, like I admire them for what they tried to do, but the thing about the comic is that every issue is incredibly incendiary or revolting, or at least exciting. And the show was just very dull. Like every once in a while somebody's head would explode or an angel would say the F word. But if you're going to adapt Preacher, the last thing you want is for it to be boring.
Well, that was the thing.
So,
Garth Ennis. I mean, I remember I loved Preacher the first couple episodes. Then I went back to the books, and then I was like, oh shit. So my memory of it was that, they're doing some stuff that's really fun and somewhat sacrilegious. And then I read the books again, and I was like, oh my God, they've emasculated every character except for Preacher. Every character is just in his service. It's like, that's not the way these characters were written. So that's it's a real shame that that happened to Preacher, because that was one of my favorites of that time period. I was like, that gave me a feeling that comic books were going to do something really intriguing again. And Mary Kay, you just mentioned about screenwriting. So James, you're in process. You've actually completed a screenplay of your own book, Fat Camp.
Yeah.
What's
Cool.
what's that like? Let's talk about the difference in writing there.
Yeah.
I mean, the number one difference, let's start with, I wrote the novel 2 years ago. So you're automatically a different writer than you were.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or at least you should be. So I'm already like looking at it like I would do this differently now, or you know, I've had the joy of so many people reading it and telling me things, but they point out like that one little thing. Well, so then you start thinking about that one little thing and how you would change it if you had the opportunity, but you can't keep rewriting this book for the rest of your life, you know? So going into the screenplay, I was able to do it very differently. So like the book is all told from the main character's point of view. And there's parts that make that problematic because he kind of knows things that he shouldn't. But he knows them because as he's telling you the story, they've happened. But it's kind of weird when you're reading it. Well, so with a screenplay, it's not from his point of view, you know? So you can kind of make those cuts and it's automatically different. But I was also able to just follow more characters and just like explore their weirdness or that kind of stuff. And I think it really comes down to what I just said, though, that 2-year difference and who I am as a writer now, I'm thinking about things differently. So it's just automatically different. And then also it is a different medium. And I actually really hate the argument of the book versus the movie because they're not the same thing at all. Mm-hmm. And like one is basically one brain to another brain. So I write something, Scott reads it, Scott gets to view it how he wants, right? A movie is I write something, somebody pays me for the idea, they throw away what I wrote. No, but they do whatever they want with what I wrote. And then it keeps going through like 30 more people who make changes. And then the final product is the guy with the money made a bunch of decisions. And so I feel like you can never really make that argument because you're saying a group project versus something one person did, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. And again, I think that's kind of speaking to these larger studio productions versus, you know, I think, you know, if you were to take your book and go to say maybe an indie filmmaker where you and that filmmaker would have all of the creative control to collaborate to create something would be a completely different, you know, experience in film at the end than if, you know, New Line comes knocking on your door.
You have way more say, you know?
Right.
And you can kind of explain why things are the way they are. Whereas once you hand over a script to a big company,
that's it.
You don't get that say anymore.
No, you get your check and you're kind of done.
But also, like, America's just so obsessed with movies making money. Right? Like, you look at some foreign films and you can tell that they don't care nearly as much as we do about profit margin. They're just like, let's make something cool or let's make something exciting because they don't have to make as much back or they don't have to please the same investors. And I think that in itself makes this huge difference. Even like Pet Sematary, my biggest problem with that actually was the trailer, to the point that I never watched it. Because I felt like the trailer basically said, you guys have seen Pet Sematary, haha, we've made a couple changes, but like the things they changed pissed off the people that had already seen it. So I had no idea what message they were trying to send. Right. And so what I'm saying with that is I think that comes from that team atmosphere of somebody way out here from the story making the trailer and somebody over here having some weird say. And that's why you end up with this monstrosity that used to be a really good Stephen King story, still is if you pick up the book.
Yep.
But that same sort of thing happens with like changing your own script, except it's just you.
Right.
But as I'm talking to producers and they're giving me feedback, things are changing. And like Scott's reading it, like he said, and he immediately talked about some of the changes I've made. Some of that wasn't my choice. Some of it was feedback of, hey, if you want to sell me this.
Butt crack.
But it's
big
also,
sweaty butt crack in my face.
But absolutely, you have to have that. No, but there's also that other side of that same thing where they say things and you're like, wow, that makes so much sense. But I've never been on that side of the industry.
Right.
That I don't think in those terms. So it's honestly been very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think of that because you were mentioning how they're two different animals. I'm thinking of Dalton Trumbo. So Dalton Trumbo wrote a book called Johnny Got His Gun. and then he directed a very low budget version with Joseph Bottoms, I think, or Timothy Bottoms, one of the Bottoms boys, and that just didn't sound right. But the movie is now very much well known because of Metallica back in the 80s using clips of it for the movie or for the video one. But it's one of the darkest, nastiest movies Johnny Got His Gun, about World War One. A guy who gets hit with a mortar, loses his face, loses his tongue, loses his eyes, arms, legs, and they just think he's laying there and he has no cognizant behavior at all. They don't think he's alive or brain alive. And the entire movie is told in his head. And you have Donald Sutherland show up as Jesus, saying, well, I died on with spikes in my hands for you. And he's like, I don't have hands. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's that kind of fucking movie. But it's so interesting to see it work in two different mediums, but both of them are somewhat heavy-handed and they have their own particular problems. And some of it is that you don't quite get what the hell Dalton's going for in the book. Visually, he gets that worked out, but so much of it is that thing that I think William Friedkin talks about, which is show me, tell me. He says so many movies are meet me in 20 minutes in front of the store, and then the next shot is 20 minutes later in front of the store. And so it's that kind of thing that Dalton Trumbo as a writer does incessantly in that movie, because it's a guy that can't express. He's laying there. So it's Timothy Bottoms sitting there going, what is that feeling? What is that weird feeling? And you're watching Jenny Agutter sponge bathing him. And he's like, oh, the feeling, it's such a wonder. And you're like, holy shit, I don't know whether I should. This is despairing and it's hilarious. This is like SCTV at the same time, something very serious. So it's interesting to try and balance between what you need to do visually and what you do on the page. So James, since you talked, we've been talking about this, when you were writing, because it's a very cinematic book, right? It's made on cinema. It's based on slashers, which is a very visual image. How did you work with that in knowing that you're going to a word medium? And did you have moments where, it's like the Pet Sematary thing? People have seen slashers before. I'll just put this. Yeah.
Kinda. So first I wrote a screenplay, which is ironic because now the screenplay is nothing like that, So basically I wrote a screenplay and then I used that. Well, first I let it sit around for 5 years. Then I used it as like a hardcore outline for the book. And then the book was very short. And so I started exploring other characters or asking myself kind of questions that I didn't have time for in a 90-minute screenplay. And that literally gave birth to other characters. And it kind of shifted the momentum or the motivation of the killer. Well, not kind of. It definitely shifted the motivation of the killer because his reason for killing wasn't even in the original script. And so when you say that it was meant to be cinematic, I mean, definitely, because it was always meant to be a film. And then the way I write is very much, I see things and I just write down as much of it as I can. It's like watching trailers. And so basically I write down anything I can see, and then I go in and I ask why, or how did they get there, or where is this character when this is happening? And so that just kind of filled in the book, is following those questions. Does that kind of answer it? I think I stayed on topic.
Hell yeah. So Mary Kay, we've been talking about writing, and of course you're a writer. You're also a voracious reader. You do reviews for Book Riot. What do you look for in a book? What is the thing that really excites you when being someone who reads so much? What is it that gets you going?
That's I mean, I know it's really subjective, but I know what I like the best about, especially when I'm starting a book, is that it seems like something I haven't read before, but it's very accessible and I can relate to it almost immediately. Which it seems like paradoxical, but just like, for example, I started reading Bunny by Mona Awad a couple days ago. It just came out, I think, maybe a year ago. And I was immediately like, so I understand the situation exactly. And it's so bizarre also. It's like one thing is just tweaked enough for me to be like, but why is that one thing like that? And just kind of get into it that way, if that makes sense. The thing that keeps me going, and I think maybe Laurel said it earlier, when the characters, when I'm invested in them, when I think actually maybe Scott, you and Laurel and Vanessa all said it about Paul Tremblay's books, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, where he makes you, I don't even know how he does it, man. It's like he makes you care about what happens to that person, whether or not you like them, which I think is a really hard thing to do.
And it's so quick too.
Yeah.
I mean, just to care about them without having very much in the way, and there is development as he goes on, but it doesn't require that for you to get sucked into it.
Right, and the only things that I've read from him are his collection of short stories, Growing Things, but I would have to take breaks in between each one because I was like, that was an emotional ride. Like I had to go watch Parks and Rec and clear my brain out for a second and just laugh at something silly, and then I can come back to it and look at it again. But yeah, and I think I also, the marker for me of like whether a book is good, right? Because everybody has a different idea of what's good. But it's like you can be in the grocery store and like looking at laundry detergent 4 days later and be like, oh, that's what that was. Like it keep thinking about it even after it's over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So most of that is character, right? Like most of that is like, oh, that's why they did this thing. And then sometimes when the characters are static, the world around them is changing, and you pick up different details of the plot or even the setting of like why that happened when it did. It has nothing to do with the person. It's just like the place they were, the place they happened to be or whatever. Yeah, so I think that those are the markers to me of what, if it sticks with me and then if it gets me right away, which I know, again, seems like a paradox, which is why, I mean, I don't really know how to say how to do it. Hopefully we all here have mastered it and just kind of like unconscious geniuses, you know?
Right.
Tell someone else how to do it, but I got it down.
You're right.
So yeah.
That's great. Thanks for all of that. And I hate to, I don't want to make this like the Paul Tremblay fan club or anything, but we seem to be
all
talking,
like him, so it's
we
fine.
seem to be talking about him a lot. But when you mentioned, you know, having something come back to you, you're like sitting there looking at detergent, all of a sudden, oh shit. I keep hearing the rain at the end of that book, where there's just this despairing moment where these people are left basically in the woods, and it's raining, and I can hear that rain. I was just thinking about how insanely cinematic that was, and how sad it was, and how inspiring it was. There's something about, there are a few moments that I can think of in literature where I am in despair and I'm celebrating it. Like, that was amazing. I can't help. I'm like, oh God, that hurts. And I'm like, I can't believe how fucking good that was.
Right. I feel like that about all of Cormac McCarthy's books.
I was just, that's where I was going, you know, talking about, and that would be the unfilmable one, right? You know,
yes. Blood Meridian, please.
Blood Meridian.
I've started it 4 different times and I'm just like, this is too much even for me. Like I can't.
And there's where you're looking at style is so daunting, and yet you're getting all of this weird character development, even though the whole book is like it's like Cops, but done in the Old West. I actually thought if they were ever going to do it, they should like really do like a punk rock version, like what Alex Cox did with William Walker. It was a period piece where the Clash were in it, and there were helicopters and stuff. So I would think like you should have everybody wearing body armor, and it's all body armor cameras. That's the only way that you could do Blood Meridian. Like you get everybody's point of view from this really chaotic.
What a cool like sort of way to incorporate both our like culture, like popular culture, and also use that as like the shoot, like the filming technique. How
Yeah.
would that be?
It's the only thing that I could think of, because there's no great, the narrative is so fucked. It's basically run away. It's just run away, and here comes the madness of the world all around you. And Judge Holden, how are you going to do Judge Holden? But I was just like, that's
Monster.
a book.
He's a
Yeah,
monster.
it's a book that
I mean, it pretty much has to be John Carroll Lynch, right? Like, there's no one else.
Probably. Yeah, probably. And he's too
Probably.
kind looking. I don't know how you, but yeah, it's just bizarre. How about, who's got, go ahead, John. I see I have one.
Well, we'll pose what James is talking about is what stories you wish would be made into a film that haven't been.
Okay.
There was the most striking horror comic that I've read recently is this graphic novel called Sentient by TK Studios, and it's by Jeff Lemire, who's one of my favorite writers, and artist Gabriel Volta. And I guess the elevator pitch would be Alien meets Lord of the Flies, but it really so what Mary Kay was talking about these familiar elements, but also becomes incredibly unique because it changes the formula on both of those influences, where you like immediately are emoting with these children and sort of fall in love with them in a way that you don't with Lord of the Flies. And the way it has something to say about the nature of intelligence, the nature of how you grow up, and the nature of familiar relationships that can be made rather than what you're born into. And so you can like predict the sort of very basic plot elements of the story, but the way it unfolds is incredibly unique and original.
Cool.
And
I love that. Yeah.
And as you fall more in love with these characters, the more you're horrified because you want them to survive. But of course, it's, children alone in space, and so things don't work out as well as you would like. But the way it unfolds is incredibly beautiful, and is always nice when you can describe a horror story as also like a beautiful piece of art.
Do you mind to put that in the chat, the name of it, so that I can?
Yeah,
sure.
I swear it's like Lord of the Flies. It's like I really get the point of it, but when people say it's their favorite novel, I'm always like, it's so unpleasant. Like you like to go back and read, but I mean, to each their own. But I think that's something that's missing from it. Is being able to actually like enjoy the characters at all and be invested in their fate.
Right. Who wants to be Piggy? Who wants to know Piggy? Yeah. But
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for putting that on there, John.
Sure. And I have to finish up here at work, so I appreciate
God.
chatting
I was
with you all.
just gonna wonder. I was like, where are you, by the way?
Yeah.
Probably close.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. Thank you for the great conversation.
Yeah. And John, do us a favor. Put a link to your store in the chat so we can promote it.
Yeah.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Take care.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. And that's something
Thank you.
for all of us as well. Anything that you guys want to promote, please do. Copy, paste, put it into the chat because we want to promote. One of the things that we wanted to do here was make this like an after hours conversation that we have at conventions. We're missing those. We hunger for those. Just the idea, if it doesn't matter what we're talking about, like it's not a horror book, who cares? We're talking.
Yeah,
and
we're just
the
having
idea
conversations.
and promoting each other during this time when none of us are able to get things done that we want to get done. And one of them, I was talking with James before the show yesterday that, I've been doing my podcast for 4 years and I do essays. I do some interviews, but what I love to do is take 4 or 5 movies and come up with a theme and talk about what's happening in the world. And I enjoy doing that. It's so much fun. I wrote a book, so much fun. And so I know how to write. And suddenly I don't. It's like the world has just gone soft between my eyes. And I'm without so many different things that I usually have for influence to get me an impetus that helps me write. And it's not like anything really changed. I'm pretty much a work at home guy anyway. And, I'm doing this all the time and somehow not ever falling out of love with what I'm doing, but falling out of love with trying to find time for it, trying to get energy for it. Days all look the same. I was thinking about how that might be something to talk about here as writers. We don't want, nobody wants to be I don't want to have a COVID-19 book for a decade. Talk about it in a decade, because it's just going to, once we're done with this, people are going to want to wipe their butts with it. But in 10 years, when we have some time to look at it, then we'll see what it really means, what we really learned about each other. But there is this sense of a cognitive dissonance of being in a horror movie where we're in an apocalypse, but you can still get takeout. And that's just such a weird connection. It's not, and the idea of hail our the essential workers. But back in the day, essential workers were firemen and police officers and doctors. And that's what we talked about. It's Amazon people now. It's people delivering things for us. And that's a weird twist on where our mindset is as a culture, as a country. And we understand police officers and firemen risking their lives. It's what they do. But an Amazon person risking their life for this, and that's part of our lives now. Yeah. And yet we don't want to stay in. We're making people risk their lives, and we don't want to fucking stay in. We don't want to wear a fucking mask. It's so bizarre. And I think why we're going nuts is that it feels like the end of the world should be an all or nothing thing. It shouldn't be a thing where there's a part-time amusement park moment.
No, but what's happening now almost seems like a satirical plot for, a post-apocalyptic horror film, but that has just a little bit of like, aha, but we're living it. I mean, yeah, it's kind of baffling.
It's also really weird how we are so concerned with having others there to serve us. We want people to bring stuff to our house. We want people to make us dinner. We want people to give us the beer while we hang out with our friends. And we don't want to be the one to risk that, right? Like we don't all want that same level. That's why you're essential, but I have to stay home. And I view it as such a weird use of that word, because I would think that the people who consider themselves essential are protecting themselves.
Mm.
And that's, my brother's in medicine, and that's what they did with him. Like, if, they had him switch to telemedicine visits, because that was the thing. They were like, he's essential. If he goes down, we're not going to have anyone to do this job. Yeah. And the way I've heard it expressed from people who are considered essential workers now, they're like, oh, no, we're not essential. We're expendable.
Yes. That's what it feels like.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, is that it's like a part-time apocalypse. And it is, I think a big part of it for me, because I've not been doing the greatest at writing either, but I think my well is dry. I'm, I've got, my son is 2, he's home from daycare. My husband and I are both working from home, and it's just exhausting. So like by the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to watch Dark, but season 3 just hit, so pretty excited about that.
Queer Eye. I've gone Queer Eye. Everything about, I've been watching that every season of it. I ended up watching all the baking shows twice. I know more about the British baking show than I should. And I should be writing, and I do. And then I'm like sitting there going, I can't believe it took me 3 hours to get a paragraph that I don't like.
Well, I think some of it has to do with just how uncertain things are and how hard it is to plan. Like, we're trying to finish a film that we started in March, and it got, shut down, and we're trying to kind of regroup and figure out when we can film again. And I don't have an answer to that. And it's really hard to kind of pull stuff, together when you're like, well, I don't know. How do you plan for things when you don't know, even with school, like I feel like that's changing every day. Are the kids going back? Or are they not? Is it full-time or is it part-time? And, there's just so many things up in the air that I think it's easy to just kind of be like, well, I guess I'll just spin my wheels and do nothing. I think I've watched Schitt's Creek all 5 seasons twice already, which by the way, it's a great show. So I've been thoroughly entertained.
That's very interesting too, that it also depends on what state you're in. And I mean, state is in a place as well as where you are here, because I
Yeah.
have friends who are like in Nevada, moved from the Bay Area of California, a whole different quinella, to ending up in Henderson, Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, and how different the world is in those two places. And she's a high school teacher, and they're coming up with ways to make her go back to school, and she's not ready. She also she's a chemist. So she's like, what the, does no one understand? What do they think? It's a video game? Like you can actually outrun viruses if you hit double space or something?
Right.
It's crazy how people are looking at science at this point and how the physical world works. And so she's terrified. And then, the bottom falls out. These weird things of people believing or not believing, which I wish we could say was the times. But if you really look back at what happened with the Spanish flu, San Francisco had an anti-mask league, a bunch of people who were like, there is no need for this for the Spanish flu. And the name of the Spanish flu, I mean, what's his name saying, the Kung flu? They were calling it the Spanish flu because the Spanish were the only people who were being honest that actually gave numbers. Everybody else during World War I would not give numbers to the casualties that were happening. They refused to actually report on there being a flu. So it looked like everything was coming from Spain. So there's so much similarity. We haven't learned a damn thing in 100 years. And we just have this weirdness now where we see everything. And we have Amazon and all these places doing it. But that idea, Laurel, of you saying expendable, absolutely. I'm an old fireman, and I think about being of service all the time. And my brother-in-law is a doctor, and my sister-in-law and her daughter are both nurses. And they were in I'm originally from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, this little coal mine area, but they were number 2 in the East Coast per capita of being a plague world, because first was Manhattan and then was Hazleton, because they had an Amazon that ended up being infected, and they had whatever the food place was that did food
Tyson.
for. Yeah, both of those were. They had 2 of the infected warehouses because it's a heavily red area, and so the idea was it's all a hoax. So there was no social distancing. 30 to 40,000 people, most people working in these plants. Everybody went home, everybody went to the bar, everybody got sick. And so my brother-in-law was a doctor who was at risk. He's got obesity problems, he's got diabetes, and he's doing everything in his house, trapped in his house, watching monitors, basically doing medical through his PC, while his wife and his daughter were quarantined in a tent because they were they had somebody that was contaminated. And so the workers are becoming contaminated, the people who are going to help you. And that's the thing that people aren't getting about this, and where it was really a horror story. It's not Typhoid Mary or Camille laying there going, oh, looking beautiful with TB. It's the people who are your infrastructure, which is already sweating bullets because you took all the money out of it and lowered everything and lessened the amount of people who are doing the essential work. They are overtaxed, and one of them gets sick. It's a domino effect. Before you know it, there's nobody there to help you. What are you going to do? Ask a politician to sew you up? Go fuck yourself. You're not going to. But you're letting these politicians kill the people who are actually going to be able to help you. And it's like a horror movie. It is Lord of the Flies. There is very few people to like in this story, it seems.
I think that's one of my problems with writing right now is I use horror as a way to make sense of things that bother me, right? Like I can figure out a killer's motivation or why things happen in a story, and I can never do that with the news.
Right.
And I feel like this is so 24/7 that I never have downtime to even think about it, let alone try to use this other medium to make sense of everything around me. And the last fucking thing I want to do right now is write about this damn disease.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody's just so, it's just inundated. It like you said, it's 24/7. I mean, it's everywhere we look. It's constant. And, you know, it's funny because I'd say being in a creative field, and I'm sure you guys get it too, everyone's like, oh, you know, you should write about this or you should do this. And it's like, no, thanks. Want no part of this. But you'll see it though. There's going to be like a huge influx, I'm sure, coming up of crazy, you know, COVID related Sharknado movies that are,
of course,
and the virus.
The ironic thing is that I talk about this a lot on my podcast, which is if you want to find out what people were really scared about, look at the exploitation and the drive-in films, the horror movies of the time, because they live on the idea of outrage. They live on the idea of exploiting what it is that drives you crazy. It doesn't matter which side of it you're on. It's going to be heavy enough of a theme, or incendiary enough that it's going to register with both sides. Like there's a movie called The Hunt right now, which is basically Pizzagate but done with horror movies, and that is an exploitation film that has that same kind of thing that you would see, and that's going to be something that underneath the veneer of COVID-19 is what really scares us. You know, this thing is doing this to us and getting rid of. I look at it as almost like biblical, but it's not doing what the Bible people thought was going to happen. The Bible people were thinking that it was going to affect guys like me, you know, the big sinners. But in reality, it's like, oh, we can't keep kids in cages anymore because of COVID. Yeah, I guess we're going to have to let them out. All of these things that nobody could move, suddenly things are starting to move and fall apart because the system wasn't working, but it had just enough snot behind it and Scotch tape to be able to hold it for a couple months. Well, now we're in month 4. And all that stuff's starting to fall apart. But that's just the coding, the stuff that we're really upset and angry and disturbed about, and the things that are cognitive dissonance are underneath that. And I'll be interested to see what our art tells us unconsciously, because I think a lot of times we get to that stuff unconsciously. You know, in one of my podcasts, I talked about, you know, here we are in COVID, and I said, this is like a big Greco-Roman wrestler just lands on you. And you're like, okay, all right, I get it. We need to change things. It's like, no, you don't get it. I'm just going to lay here for a little bit more. No, I get it. We're sinning. We'll fix everything. Nope, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay on top of you for a while. And it's driving us mad. We want to be punished to a certain level. This thing's punishing us way past to where we're going to get humble. We can't help but get humble. And we'll see what happens.
We just got a comment from John Ferris. If he wants to come in and join us, I'd love to hear his thoughts. He said, let me tell you what it's like to be a medic in this current environment. I have plenty of material to write from the stuff I've seen. Just wait until the flu mixes with this.
Ooh, John.
Well,
come in.
Join us. Click the link
top
and ring the doorbell.
Yeah, ring our bell, man. You know, because I know the people that I know in the field, especially people like that I have friends in New York, real crazy stories. And it's so enraging for them to hear the different stories that are out there, right? You know, the way it's not happening in certain areas. But, you know, well, I'll let a man who knows this stuff. And sorry, Mary Kay, I just noticed that you have 2 stories that you wish would be made into a film.
Oh, no, I can wait. I just thought of them while we were talking.
Yeah.
Can we come back to him though? Because I want to know.
Okay. Yeah. I want to know exactly. We're curious writers, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like he's trying to load Zoom. He's having issues. Okay.
He'll be in a minute. You tell us your 2. Listen.
Yeah. Tell us the 2.
We're on our own timeline.
That's right.
Okay.
The bourbon is flowing.
I know. I didn't want to change the subject though. I was like, let me do this while I
You get to do whatever you want. That's what's great about this.
I think we're all stone-headed enough. We'll get right back where we want to go.
Okay. The first one I thought of that I think should be a movie that isn't yet is called The Cooper's Wife is Missing. It's the trials of Bridget Cleary. It's nonfiction about this woman who I think she had the flu and maybe depression. Her husband at the time thought she was possessed by a fairy, so he tried to exorcise the fairy from her. Killed her. She ended up dying. But he really believed that that's what he was doing. So I think he ended up getting convicted for manslaughter rather than murder. But
Wow.
really interesting and very scary real life story that happened about 100 years ago. So like not even that long ago. Yeah, I as I was reading that, and I think it probably hasn't been made a movie because it's nonfiction, and you want to make sure that you depict everybody respectfully, but also don't lose any of the story of it.
Mhm.
So yeah, one of the books that I thought could be very well adapted into a film because it's so cinematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I lost the other one. Oh, yes. Okay. So a book called Hadriana and All My Dreams. It is in 2017 was translated from the French in full for the first time. It takes place in Haiti, and it's about a zombie bride and a butterfly human with an insatiable libido and a woman with 7 loins, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I just, as I was reading it, was like, I need to see it. Like, yes,
Right.
I'm seeing it in my head, but I also like am casting Angela Bassett, and like I need all of these people to be in this movie.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that book. I mean, I can believe it. It is a tragedy that it's not more famous than it is, and I can only imagine that it's because it's Haitian versus anywhere else in the Caribbean. It hasn't. I mean,
Yep.
it's only just been translated all the way, but it's awesome. Like I was flying through it because I was like, but like I even remember writing in the margin, like, what do you mean 7 loins?
Right.
Like, in the first paragraph, it's like, nope, that is exactly what you said. Okay, I got it now. The butterfly is obsessed with her, right? Because anyway, there's this woman who drinks the zombie potion, which is like in the very literal, like Haitian folkloric sense of being a zombie, not like a ghoul from a movie. But it's really interesting too, and I think that especially because our popular culture often conflates those two. I don't know. It's really interesting, and that's Renee de Pestre. I'm sure that I mispronounced that because it's a French name, and French vowels don't make any sense to me. But
Well, I
it's
think if you
translated
say it with an accent, it's forgiven.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Uh-huh.
My name is Mr. Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I can never pronounce
That's what it sounds like to me.
anybody's names.
But the translator is Kayama Glover. So that one I can do. Yeah,
That's-
and it's only like 3 years old, I think. I mean, it's originally published, I believe, in the 60s, but only.
Yeah.
It sounds like one from the 60s. It's like the couple that I have are books that I don't know are necessarily great books, but I think, and sometimes the stuff is, I love it because of what I read into the book, not what the pompous writer wanted me to read.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. So one is called Time Travel for Pedestrians, and it's by Ray Nelson's guy who did a short story that became John Carpenter's They Live. But Time Travel for Pedestrians is this really very 60s psychedelic idea of finding out, like having multiple lives. The time travel is multiple lives to finally get to a place where you could love yourself. And so it's starts with this guy who the first line is masturbation is the final frontier, and it's all about how we tell lies about ourselves all the time, and the only true truth that we tell to ourselves is the weird porno movie that plays between our eyes when we're masturbating. And so he has this whole idea of what we need in sensation to take us to that next place. And he uses morning glory seeds and the Tibetan Book of the Dead and a reel-to-reel tape to trance into this area where he goes through multiple deaths. And he's going through these multiple deaths, starting in a pagan world where he's this woman who is raped by her Cernunnos and is killed sexually, and then goes into the Knights Templar, and then goes to the Inquisition, and then goes to Jesus, and how he's a scribe scrambling to try and find one of the apostles who he can write their story, because Christ has just been killed and it's chaos everywhere and everybody's trying to get a book deal. And so he finds Mad Mary of Magdalena and he goes, I'll be your writer. And she goes, why are all these traitorous guys who barely even know him calling themselves apostles and getting their stories written? I knew him. I loved him. And you know what's funny? You want to write my story? He goes, he came to release us from a book and you want to make another one. And I was like, whoa, 14-year-old me living in a house full of Jesus and everything's a sin. This story pinned me to the wall. And it said everything that I needed to hear about how everybody rules you until you find how you can be honest with yourself. That when you finally realize who you are, then there's true freedom. And the end of the story is him coming up against the angel with a spinning sword. And he chokes it to death. And he takes the sword and he just spins around. He goes, I guess I'll go in this direction. And it's him finally being free. And I'm like, fuck, that would be such a story to see made into a film. Not a great story though. I mean, it's cinematic, but it's very 60s dopey. You know, it's got some stuff in it that's so hippy dippy that you can't help but laugh out loud. Like, man, this guy has to stop taking himself so fucking seriously. But it spoke to a part of me that needed speaking to, where I was damn near suicidal. And I had this guy coming out of nowhere talking about these feelings that I was having, the strange sexuality that was coming up, and nobody's talking to me about it. And all of that was great. And another one is a book called Say You Love Satan by David St. Clair. It's based on the 1985 murders that ended up being part of River's Edge, but it was kind of the moment when my generation turned into the worst people ever. And it's two kids that murdered another kid in Northport, Long Island. And allegedly it was a satanic thing where they cut his eyes out. There's a guy named Ricky Casso, the Acid King, and his friend killed this one kid. And everybody allegedly was a Satanist. And the book is so tawdry and so full of bullshit. And the guy is so self-important trying to tell the story of these kids. He tells a completely different story. And the story is magnificent. It would be such a great tabloid satire of how self-important we think we are after the fact when kids do wrong. And it really makes a joke out of the backyard of Manhattan look of Long Island and what they think of their kids. And why would kids who you think were just going to be druggy scumbuckets, you find out they're upper middle class kids and their parents are teachers and gym teachers of their school. And they purposely were so disgusted by the way that their family lived and that riches that was there, and they were so bored that they dropped out and slept in other people's houses instead of going home, and took acid and became Satanists and refused anything that was happening in that life. And it was so intriguing. Like my mouth was watering while I was reading this terrible book, thinking about how cinematically you could just throw this punk rock heavy metal attitude up against the wall of what Reaganomics was like and what the Reagan era 80s was like. It was such a great slam on that. And it's a terrible book. I mean, terrible. But it inspired me so much that if I ever was able to make a movie, that would be what I would make. I would make this thing about the clueless saviors of people who don't want saving. And it's a really interesting story. Anyway, our poor friend doesn't seem to be getting in, huh?
I guess not. I don't know. Maybe he is downloading the Zoom. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he'll join us.
Okay. It looks like James has another book movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. So it's really more of a short story. Well, it is a short story. It's actually in Behold, which is an anthology by my friend Doug Moreno. And it was written by Christopher Koch. And it's a story called Knitter. And I don't want to really ruin it because there's something truly beautiful about this story for me. But basically, you know that feeling when you're driving down the road and you're like, has that building always been there? It's that. So there's these creatures that are called knitters, and they basically are constantly making and remaking reality around us. So if there's suddenly a need for this building, the building will appear because the knitters make it, And then it's woven into our mental history that it's always been there. Only, you know, some people see these things and point it out. And what I love about this story is it can erase people. So like you could have been in a long-term relationship with someone and now they just don't exist. So now you remember the last 4 years totally differently.
Wow.
Like things like that. And I don't know that it would translate, but I think it is such an amazing concept that I would love to see somebody make a film or even a series. If you could make it work, I think it would just be mind-blowing.
That is so PK Dick. I mean, it's what a great idea. That's freaking me out just thinking about it. And a little bit like, what was that, Dark City? Have you seen the film Dark City? Alex Proyas. I'm butchering the name. That's the Matrix that I love. See, the Matrix to me, it has a major flaw, which is it tells us that we should be better machines. In the end, it's about downloading and becoming a better version of the cog. And that bothers me. Whereas Dark City is like, fuck you, I'm not going to play the game. The computer program has to fall and smash. If I'm dead, great. I don't care. But the thing is, I'm not going to die. You need me. I don't need you. And that's the message that the Matrix should have, instead of, I learned Kung Fu. And then he learns to fucking fly. And I'm like, you know, you're still a goddamn piece of vermicelli laying in this little pod somewhere. And it's like, God, can it be less hopeful? But that sounds like a really cool idea. I like that. Have any of you guys read Scott Smith? He did A Simple Plan was one of his first book was A Simple Plan. And then he did The Ruins, which was,
I was wondering if that was him. Yeah, The Ruins.
yeah. God, the movie's not that great. The movie has moments that are okay, but the book is just relentless, and it's perfect. I love Scott Smith because he seems his stories seem like they're going to be somewhat polite, and they're really, really sadistic. I mean, and they're sadistic in a way that works. So the idea is that these are just plants, right? These are just plants that are gonna, feed, and so they're gonna perfectly mime whatever they need to get the meal that they need. But we are the meal, so we're part of this crowd of people who are stuck with this monster, and it's doing all this terrible stuff that doesn't translate in the movie. Like it realizes that because someone had lunch, that it can smell what bread smells like. So when they have no more food, it starts to pollinate this smell of bread to drive them just a little bit more mad, to have them go crazy enough to walk close enough to get a vine stuck into their arm or something like that. And it's just what I love about that story is kind of like what I like about a movie called Open Water, which is two people, sharks.
Oh, yeah.
Without the boat. I love it because you know how it's going to end, and yet you can't not watch. And how do you balance dread to be able to allow that to be watchable or viewable or readable? And it takes a certain amount of talent, and Smith has that. Smith, you know where it's going to go, and yet somehow he gives you just enough hope over and over and over again. And he has a short story that is so horrible, and yet I have to recommend it. And I have to recommend the book it comes in, which is the best hardcore horror of 2018. And I have the last 4 years, I guess. And it's famous authors basically putting in the book that it was too hardcore for regular outlets. And his is called Dog. And it is just absolutely disturbing about this woman who gets a dog, and the dog starts to get human personality. You know, we all talk about how it seems like our animals are human, and this goes really, really creepy, really bad. And once she has this dog, all other dogs realize that she knows that dogs have this human piece, and they start fucking with her. And it sounds funny till you're reading it. And you're like, Jesus
and what
Christ.
is the collection it's in?
It's called The Best Hardcore Horror, The Best Hardcore Horror of, and whatever year. It's 2018, that one. One of the best stories.
Will I be able to handle this?
Some no. some absolutely no, and some absolutely yes. And they're brilliant. So, I mean, they are
I'm gonna check it out.
They are for horror fans. Excuse me, but there's one called Dick Pic that you might actually enjoy, which is a guy being cursed for giving a dick pic, and it basically goes after his member, this curse. And,
oh Lord.
And and there's a whole group of guys that have this issue, and there's certain things that they can do to try and reverse it, and it's not pretty. So you may enjoy that, you may not enjoy that, but
I'll check it out. I'll dip my toes in.
Yeah, they go from hilarious to grotesque. It's kind of like anthology movies, which is a strange thing about anthology horror movies. There's always the scary one, and then there's this weird lighthearted one that never makes sense to me. Why do they have a lighthearted one? And
I
then
have to think they're trying to balance it out or something, right? I mean, I noticed that too about anthologies, is that they try to like check these boxes, at least the film ones I'm speaking of. Mm-hmm. I feel like they try to check the boxes of, you know, if it's a horror anthology, that you've got like the super dark, gory one maybe, and then you do have one that's a little bit more lighthearted and has some levity, and then you've got, you know, I don't know if they're just trying to like get like all those little subgenres under the umbrella.
It could be. I think the first one was, I think it was called, I want to say it was Dark of Night or Edge of Night. And it's the first time a ventriloquist dummy comes to life. And that was from like the 40s. And that was super successful. And I think everybody just follows that template, which was you had the really scary one. And then you had this one about Scottish golfers who end up being ghosts that still golf. And then the last one is the one with the scary ventriloquist dummy, Sir Redgrave, whichever Redgrave it was, playing.
Don't like that at all.
And don't say its name out loud.
Yeah. So frickin' scary.
Going to appear.
Yeah, even to this day, that one still gives me a good jump, because there's a moment in there that really works.
To be interesting, I feel like ventriloquist dummies seems to be a very common scary thing among people.
Yeah, because it's not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah.
It's an inanimate object.
Yeah.
Stop talking.
Like a regular puppet, not scary. Dolls, not scary. I mean, I guess similar to the whole like fear of clowns, but like ventriloquist dummies, I don't know anyone that's like, no, I like them. They're cool.
Yeah. Well, ventriloquists probably.
Well, I
don't know.
I don't talk to ventriloquists because I think something's wrong. But
no, you're talking to the dummy. You think you're talking to the ventriloquist. You're talking to the dummy.
But I find it interesting that is one thing that I think everybody can kind of get on board and be like, yeah, no, they're creepy.
Well, I think it's the uncanny valley. You know, it's
It
that
totally
idea.
is.
Yeah, where you're good with dolls until the doll gets just a little bit too close to human.
Right.
So
there's this awesome essay at the end of Elena Passarello's collection of essays, Let Me Clear My Throat. It's all about memes of the human voice. So you have like this scream, you have the Wilhelm scream. It's really cool. It's a lot of cool shit in there. But the last one is a questionnaire filled out by a ventriloquist dummy who wants to buy his voice box.
Oh.
And I just remember reading it and being like, no, this is the worst thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
No, they're terrifying. Christopher G. Moore said, I have a Charlie McCarthy ventriloquist dummy. Okay, well, maybe he should come in here and explain to us why. Why do you own that? Why do you have that?
Why is that a thing that you have in your house?
Why is it that? Let's see it though. Also, like kind of.
He basically has the house from The Conjuring, right? Where it's just like, here's my haunted library full of shit that should never be in anyone's home, but destroyed immediately. Yeah, our small daughter is walking around unbeknownst. I mean, like, she doesn't know anything about this. She's just like, I want to play with that dolly behind the glass.
We told her not to, you know.
Always really like, that's the one thing I don't understand is like they're not even friendly looking. Like the average ventriloquist dummy, it doesn't look right. Like they
have the literal marionette lines, like not just the ones that like you can see in this light, but like the actual ones where it's like this one piece that comes down.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. And
the worst ones are the ones that the eyes can move. Like there's a little thing in there where you can Eyes, I can't.
No, I joke all the time. I'm like, I don't want anything like that in my house because I know that it gets up at night and walks around. I mean,
It tries to steal
that's
my
not
voice
even
like
a
a sea witch.
Oh God, they're terrifying. You know, I mean, I do have. Okay, you can't really see my office because I have the silly Ghostbusters library behind me right now. But you know, I mean, I don't collect a lot of stuff, but like I like unusual kind of creepy things to decorate, but nothing too scary.
Right.
Like I would never allow that.
Nothing actually haunted. All replicas, please.
Oh yeah, replicas of haunted things. But what drives my daughter crazy is I have an original Bozo the Clown doll. But I don't find that nearly, I mean, you know, it's not going to come down off the shelf and get me. But if it was like, there's no way I would do that if it was a ventriloquist.
I mean, you've seen Poltergeist though, right?
Yeah, it terrified me. But I feel like this is kind of like it's like some sort of immersion therapy. Where
so you're not going to worry about the clown. It's not going to come out from under the bed and grab you and pull you under when the tree comes through the window.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure you've covered all the bases.
This is a huge trust because it's behind me right now.
That movie was doing the most.
That was the first movie that I saw in its entirety, like snuck away and watched it. I was 8 and it scared the shit out of me. I mean, and it's crazy looking back at it because I'm always kind of amazed at how certain movies are rated because the rating system has very different criteria now than it did then. That movie was PG.
Yeah.
And
what?
Children should not have been watching it.
No.
I mean, I guess they can if they want to, but I mean, I didn't let.
But they shouldn't.
No, it's scary,
Right.
and I think part of what makes it so scary is just that it takes place in the safest place at all. I mean, it happens during the day. It's in the suburbs. It's in your house, you know, with your family, and it goes bananas real quick.
And it's, you know, that is like one of my comfort horror movies, though, in large part because I can just appreciate the whole storyline of it. You know, I love the setup. I love all of that. But I also feel like it is like, it's such the presentation. It's the picture of long-term marital love too. Like that is like one of the most family oriented and like realistic, you know, because when they're getting ready to go back through, she's going through the closet and they're fighting over who the kids are more afraid of. But you know, the things that they say to each other, the language they have, they've been together for years and years, and just the little scenes too, before everything goes to hell where they're, you know, smoking weed together in the bedroom and just having a blast. And I'm like, you know, I've been married for like 11 years. So I'm kind of way past that whole, like, oh, you know, all the brand new love stories sort of thing. It's not like I don't like to watch that, but I also like to see the love story that's an ongoing love story.
Yeah.
And them, you know, that moment they have before she steps through, she knows she can anchor herself to him.
Yep.
She can trust him while she literally steps into hell, you know, to get their child. And that is just one of the most beautiful moments in cinema to me.
No, I love the vulnerability of her saying, Stephen, don't let go. If she turned around with total confidence, it doesn't work. But her turning around going, don't let go, in the face that she has, and him going, never. It's like, pow, right there. That's tremendous. And that's the essence of the film for me. You know, it's like that great, that's where it becomes very realistic, you know, and you know, I'm so glad we're talking about that kind of thing. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. These comfort, I don't have many comfortable ones.
but you know, I mean, I think that speaks to the overall message is that, you know, it's kind of like that good versus evil, love will conquer all. You know, I mean, they're able to fight it and win, I think, because of that love that's there. I mean, that's,
their love, the love for their children, which is like, again, that seemed very, very natural to me. Like, you know, obviously not an expert, but it's like the whole, you know, I mean, your kids fight with each other and, you know, everything's insane, but you absolutely just launch yourself after them no matter what insane things that they do, you know. And I also really love the doctor, the female, what was her name?
Oh,
Westring or
the paranormal team that comes in.
Yes,
Just remember her glasses.
Yes, those giant glasses. But the fact that I loved when she said, Steven or whatever his name is, she's like, he won't be back, and she grabs her hand and says, "But I will." And
Right.
to me, that's intense too, because it's like, you do sometimes run across these people that you've just met and who you happen to come across at a time when shit is just getting real, and they grab your hand and they're there with you. There's just so much to love about that movie.
Yeah. There are moments like that in the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which I think is highly underrated. And there are moments when people are rewarded for being good, where in most horror films, the good person dies, or the person who's an asshole stays an asshole. And without it being redemptive, in certain spots, it's just not redemptive. It's just a moment of like, good for you. And the person goes, thank you. Or they're like, how did you get here? Well, we shot our way out of the airport. I picked up all these people because they were just there. Good for you. And she's like, oh yeah. She just sits back and has a cigarette. And that movie's all about ignoring the problem, right? It's the new normal. Back when 9/11 was the new normal that we had to live with. Now we have this new normal that we're dealing with. It'll be interesting what to see. But that whole movie is about how do you be genuine in artifice? They're living in a mall, and Don't Worry, Be Happy is playing in the background, and they're forgetting how insane the world is outside, and they're like spray painting things and playing basketball and doing Skittles commercials. And it's just it's such an interesting movie that it then becomes genuine. It has this satire, and then there are human elements where you understand why people say what they say. And it's not a favorite with people because it doesn't play with the normal horror tropes. It has obvious dumb people in it. It does dumb stuff like most horror movies will have, but then it has these moments of genuine humanness. Another one, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, is really good.
Yeah, I saw that. That movie affected me. This is interesting. I saw certain movies when I was pregnant that affected me way different than I think they would have when I was not. And that was one that, and I watched it too, after I had my daughter and everything. I kind of went back and revisited it, and it was a different experience. But oh my gosh, that movie just shook me to my core when I saw it in the theater.
Great acting, but good intentions, right? It's a movie about good intentions going bad. And
I slept with the lights on.
I
kept waking up at 3 and was like, well, that's it.
You're waiting to see if you smell the burning smell.
Demons are here.
Yep.
God, that's so I just got chills again, that fucking burning smell. Jesus.
But it's interesting because it's not set up like a kind of, I guess, traditional horror film. It's very much kind of a courtroom drama with these elements,
I had one of my friends told me, he said, I didn't realize it was going to be a few good exorcisms. I got kind of pissed off with it. I was like, okay.
That's funny.
That's great.
We watched that in an English class I was in. I'm a paralegal, and I was a paralegal major at the time. It was just one of those gen eds I had to take. And I was an OWL, an older, wiser learner. So,
right.
I'm the oldest person in this class, probably older than the teacher. And we were watching that movie.
That was me.
And it gets to the end, and they're like, what the hell was that? What was it? I was like, it's what's called a nominal verdict. And what that, and I'm sitting there giving a fucking law lecture, but the question was answered, and the dislike of me in that class just went way up here.
Oh man, that's so funny to think of it in those terms. I think a lot of really good horror films play with genre a lot. And so I think we may be coming to the end of genre, which I think is actually kind of a cool thing. And what I mean by that is that we have gender fluidity right now to a level that has never been seen before. And it's kind of a given that that's happening. And I'm seeing more and more people doing mashups of all sorts of things. So fluidity, not label, seems to be one of the things that is a hallmark. So you see movies like Midsummer, and of course we have people who are being rude and using terms like elevated horror, which is just a slam, some ridiculous word to use. But horror can be very malleable. So having it be a courtroom drama or a police procedural is a great way to make the genre pop a little bit more and do something really crazy. I was rewatching Seven. That's a police procedural. That's Dragnet with the most horrible things ever happening on Dragnet. But it's a very much a buddy cop movie. And it's just, and what I love about that movie is that so much of it is in the liminal space. There's so little that you actually see. So much of it is implied. There was a movie, Wayne Wang made a movie called Smoke the same year. And those two movies are twins. They're stories about stories, the lust of story, and how story is what we're really terrified of, and how both of those movies rarely show you anything. They tell you things in prose. They're like Seven is an entire movie made out of the scene with Robert Shaw in Jaws, talking about the USS Indianapolis. It's just one USS Indianapolis after another, with just a few quick flashes of what the end result is. And I think that that's really interesting. And I think we're seeing more movies that, because you're already screwing with genre by having a police procedural mixed with a horror movie, you get to be a little bit more transgressive, I think. I think you can go in weirder places because you've already got people, kind of offbeat. I'm thinking of Naked, what was it? Not Naked Lunch. Naked Lunch is a fucked up one too, because that's like biopic mixed with surreal horror movie.
Yeah. Is that the one with the centipedes?
Yep. Millipedes.
Yes.
I love
screwed with my head.
I love the moment where they're saying that he's getting high on bug juice, right? He's taking the poison. And so he breathes on a millipede that's on the wall and it dies. And I'm like, oh my God, has there ever been a cooler, more disturbing look at drug addiction?
That like imprinted in my brain. It was cool though.
Yeah. I mean, there's characters in that movie that it's coming from Burroughs. So Burroughs himself wrote some really crazy stuff in Naked Lunch. There's very little of that book, Naked Lunch, in the movie. It's really a biopic about how did this guy who was a junkie become a writer, and how did he know these amazing writers, and how did he ever stay popular after murdering his fucking wife? I still don't get that. I don't know how you shoot your wife in the head doing the William Tell, and you somehow are walking reasonably free and actually kind of lauded. Yeah, it's really, really bizarre. But that's such a fucked up movie because there's so little of a fucked up book. And it's a really fucked up book. Another one that has a great opener, which is all about how America is anciently evil and mean and murderous, that the blood of millions of indigenous people, even before the indigenous people actually had their own land, that this has been a violent land that has always bled. And it's really an intriguing, galvanizing opening. And then it gets really weird really fast. You have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So we have James Sabata. You said, does anyone have fun stories of the first horror film you saw when you shouldn't have? I'm assuming you mean kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking back when she Poltergeist earlier. I was thinking about my first one, which was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I want to say I was like, I don't know, 10, somewhere in there, right? And I was at my cousin's house, and it was on HBO or Cinemax, one of those, and we were up late. We watched the whole thing, and like in the moment, I was like, that was awesome, right? And then I went home the next day, and I had to take a bath. And I get into the bathtub, and I'm 10. My parents aren't like hanging out in there, you know? And my neighbor decides to chainsaw his tree. And I fucking lost it. I'm in the bathtub bawling. I'm just bawling. Like, I mean, just terrified. And my mom and dad come running in there like, what happened? And in my head, I mean, not these exact words, obviously, I don't remember, but the equivalent of, no, I can't fucking tell them what happened. I'll get in trouble. And so I never told them. And yeah, that's literally what started me on my road to horror, I believe, is that scared me so fucking bad that I guess I'm looking for that feeling again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just
agree.
like, but it's like, it's that mix of being so in love with it in that moment, and then that absolute visceral, I never want to deal with this again, you know? And so yeah, so I was just wondering, like, if anybody else had weird first experiences, or I know Scott likes to call it the first kiss. So,
Yeah.
I'll go last then, because y'all know mine anyway.
I had a recovered memory the other day of when I was very small, like so small, my parents were still together, small, like, or I could, kids get up before you and you're just like, or back then they're like, just be quiet. Like, don't talk, just be quiet, watch your cartoons. And they had rented me like some little kid movie and I'd already seen it. And I saw the video cassette and it had a butterfly on it. So I was like, well, this is okay for me. It's got a butterfly on it. And I put it in the VCR and it started playing and I was like, this is not for kids. And I stopped it and I took the cassette and I went and woke my mom up and I was like, this isn't about butterflies. And it was Silence of the Lambs with the dead moth over her mouth.
Yeah.
She was like, no, that's not for kids. You're not supposed to be watching our shit.
I like that you went to register a complaint. You're like, right, misleading.
Hello, excuse me.
You didn't get the thing that you tried to rent. You got something else. I don't know what the hell this is.
The butterfly movie's not butterflies.
But to this day, that's definitely one of my comfort horror movies. Like, I was just the other day talking to my boyfriend, and I was like, one of the times that we hung out when we were just friends, he was like, you can have some of my coffee. And so I drank some of it and it left my lipstick on the rim. And I was like, well, people will say we're in love. And I was like, did you know that I was quoting Hannibal Lecter when I said that? And he was like, no. And I was like, I can't been out with me after that, not knowing that that was a joke. But yeah, that's definitely one of my comfort horror movies. My first horror movie that I saw that I loved, it's not really a horror movie, but it was adapted from one, is the 1999 Mummy.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Which
my
one is that?
shit. The one with Brendan Fraser.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay.
But my first celebrity crush was the guy with the face tattoos. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Magi
Good
guy?
call.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
I
call.
was like, something is happening in
He's pretty.
my heart. Yeah.
So I see Chris joined us and brought a friend.
No!
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Why do you have that? Why is it in your house?
Why are you mad at me? Is that
Why
what
did you-
Did I do something?
Why did you invite it in?
Magic is fun when you're dead.
Oh.
I'd like to be your best friend.
Yeah.
No, when I was a kid, I was into a lot of different things. I was into magic. I was into, I loved ventriloquism, even though I was always scared of the movie Magic.
Yeah.
And my mom got me this Charlie McCarthy ventriloquist doll, which has seen better days. But yeah, and it's like, but I never really could throw my voice. So I was always moving my lips when I talked, so it didn't really matter. But I don't know, I just liked it, and I've always had it. I still have my original case.
He doesn't at all make you feel uneasy.
Well, no, I keep them in a box.
So you think.
Well, well, the funny thing is, I do have this story. Many years ago when I lived in an apartment, I woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I heard a voice. And it was like a deep voice. And it's like, I'll be your best friend.
I hate this.
And I woke up, I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, well, I thought, well, maybe it's just like, I'm still like dreaming. So I go back to sleep, I turn off the lights, and right when I turn the lights on, I'll be your best friend. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, either if there's a ghost in my apartment or I've gone crazy. and I'm hearing voices. So then like I like stood still and waited around, and then I heard it again. It was coming from the corner of my room. It was like, "I'll be your best friend." And I go over, and I had these dolls I got for Toy Story many years ago when I worked in a movie theater to promote it. And the Woody doll, the string had broken on it, and so it slowed down to where it was like Woody. You know, like when you slow audio down, it sounds more creepy.
Yeah.
Woody saying, "I'll be your best friend." And
Well, you may think it was a Woody doll, but I'm pretty sure you had a demon.
Pretty sure it was the devil.
Probably. And I make horror films, and I'm the biggest scaredy cat. So I'm just getting haunted because I'm telling these stories.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about it now, so it's going to happen tonight.
So yeah.
So you know,
have Charlie be like, "I'll be your best friend."
Oh, look at its face.
Yeah,
that's not friendly.
That's Charlie McCarthy. That's why he was the most famous radio ventriloquist. They did ventriloquism on the radio.
Yeah, he used a monocle thing, which he has a little indentation there, but I love it.
Right. Just say it was a knife fight. That sounds better than he lost his monocle. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, I also have a puppet as well, because I did comedic improv for 7 years. I did everything from even did musical improv and actually performed on the Citizens Parade Theater in New York City a couple of years. But because there was this puppet group called Fuzz, and they improvised puppets, and it was the funniest thing. And so I got a puppet and made him up to look like me. So now it's like,
well, do you have it? You can't talk about it and not show it.
Well, sometimes you'll see it in some of my videos, but
I
mean, yeah,
that's great.
No
one fears that. Nobody.
Yeah. Although we're joking about like if we ever get out of this pandemic or whatever, and I get to go to film festivals again, I'll just put little backward creep shirts on it and take it with me. I do what I used to do when I did my film Knob Goblins, where we carried the
Nobby
creature. Yeah, Nobby.
Yeah, he showed up everywhere.
I just thought I'd show you.
That's
thing. Next time I see you, Vanessa, I'll bring him with me.
Oh, please.
Well, your whole thing about the Woody doll has me. I have to tell an Exorcist story. You'll love this Exorcist
yes.
story. So this was back in the 80s. I was in the Air Force, and I ended up getting a knee injury, and they had to do knee surgery. So I was off, and I was kind of on leave for about a month. And I was in New England, and I had a friend who lived in Connecticut. And I said, "Can I stay at your place for a week? I have a week's leave." And he's like, "Sure, but I work in a lab, but I got a bunch of movies, so you can watch movies and stuff. And we'll do something at night." So, I'm kind of incapacitated on a couch. I've got the big, inflatable thing on my knee and the crutches, and I'm looking through his stuff, and he has an old, like first copy version of The Exorcist. Now this is in the 80s, but on videotape, the first Warner Brothers one, which had this big clamshell. And I knew that, being the weird film buff that I am, that back when The Exorcist first came out, the original cuts, it had subliminal messages in them. In other words, they were just blurs. Now we can see them with the naked eye because they were forced after some guy broke his nose, fainted and broke his nose, and a couple other people fainted over these sequences, that people weren't sure whether or not subliminal images could cause trouble, but they knew that there were flashes in the movie that Friedkin had put in editing. And the answer to that was extend them. Instead of having it be 2 frames, make it 8 frames so people could actually see the face. And this videotape was of one where you couldn't quite see the face. So I'm rewinding, the big old remote and everything. And this guy, this is a college student kind of house. So he's got the old console TV and big screen and the stereo and everything on it. Yeah. And I'm stuck on this chair and I'm like watching, and I get to the old, the scene where Father Karis is having a nightmare. His mom is about to die. And so he sees her going down or coming up the subway. And she's there with bags and she smiles and there's like a shot of her and there's a flash. And then there's these dogs fighting, and then a St. Christopher's medal floating. And I'm like, I got to go back and see this. And now we all know what Pazuzu looks like now because we've all seen the image elongated. It's that white face with the black marks in the teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Think of seeing that for the first time ever when you're not supposed to see it. So I'm going frame by frame on this thing, clink, clink, and all of a sudden I see this thing going, and I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, look at that. And, there's no cameras or anything. I can't show anybody. So I'm like, okay, that's fucking awesome. But I'm done. I'm a little creeped out. So I turn off the TV. And I sit there and I put on a book. I hear this click. And the TV comes back on with that face going. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like, okay, this is bullshit. So I get up and I go and I turn off the TV by hand and I hobble on back. I sit down, I put up the book and I hear click. And I look and it goes off. Click. I go, I'm out of here. So I grab my crutch and I go outside. I'm literally outside of the house and I'm like, I don't know if I can go back in there. What the fuck was going on? It just so happens it was an old console TV and the old clicker, like the old 1970s big clunk, clunk, clunk thing was in a basket on the back of the TV. And it had batteries that had slowly been eroding away. And it was in its last gasp, and it was just popping enough power that just at that moment, the high coincidence, I don't even know, but it was popping the TV.
That's not a coincidence.
Every
you
time
had
I was
a
clicking it
demon.
off.
That's the devil.
Yeah, I was like, holy shit. And me, I love to scare everybody. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Any other movie, I mean, I still probably would have been freaked out if it was like Fantasia or something. But the idea that it was
What if it was Weekend at Bernie's? Would that have scared you?
Maybe. It was him going, perhaps. No, I'm in the shower and I hear the click and I open up the thing and the console's there. The TV walked up the steps.
Would have, that's scary. I would have not been able to just write that off to coincidence. I would have been like, there's shit in the house.
Well, I
gotta get out
outside.
now.
I stayed outside till my friend came home and I'm telling him and he's like, you're out of your fucking mind. What are you talking about? And we're sitting there and finally at some point the TV did that click off and click on. He's like, whoa, okay, well, we got some kind of problem. He's like searching all around.
Demons.
Yeah. And he ends up deducing what it is and making me feel like an idiot. But I was like, I cannot believe that this happened with The Exorcist of all fucking movies. Because even to this day, if there's any movie, like I went to see it when they had the version you've never seen back in 2000.
Right.
And they had new footage, which I was sitting in the theater. It was like a midnight showing. And I'm used to the word The Exorcist and then, hey, and then you see the red sun and everything. And instead it says The Exorcist and it cuts to a Steadicam shot of Georgetown at night, a Georgetown street at night with a little bit of fog and leaves blowing. And I'm suddenly scared shitless. I'm like, nothing's happening, but I'm like, if there's one movie that should never change on you once you've learned it, it's The Exorcist. And I was like, I'm suddenly scared like I've never seen The Exorcist before. And I'm like, these is just, and nothing happens. It's just like a B-roll that they said, let's put it in the front of the film. But just that one change was so big. And The Exorcist just has this energy for me. And I think it's because of demons, because of being
I think it has that energy for a lot of people. I mean, look at the impact that it had. I mean, and just like you said, just changing one simple thing to just some B-roll footage of a street with leaves was able to take, you to a place of like, oh shit, it's different. And that scared you. It would have terrified me for sure.
Well, I wonder what's going to happen because I think it does have impact, but I think it depends on how old you are in a way or what your upbringing is. Because I think we're in a more secular world now. And I don't think that The Exorcist is as scary when it's not as transgressive. There was something to 1973. I mean, the Catholic Church had just come out, the Pope had just said, that we are getting more secular, and it's frightening. I think sadism is on the rise because we don't fear the repercussions of God or the devil anymore. We're looking at the devil as a concept, not as an actual entity. And then you have the movie The Exorcist, and which is basically right on target with that. But now, I think we're more afraid of, guys that cut your head off and put it on YouTube, right? The video on YouTube. And we're more afraid of the invisible monsters. I mean, like, I just went to the dentist, and for the first time since all of this, and it's such a weird experience now. And one of the things was sitting there and having to get an x-ray. And they're like, okay, we're going to take an x-ray. And there's all these extra precautions that need to happen, but they put the big lead vest on me, and then they run away. And they put this tube right next to my face. And I'm going, this is very interesting. They are shooting my face, my skull, with invisible monsters. And I am dodging other invisible monsters to be here, to have other monsters thrown right in my face. Why can't people believe in invisible monsters? We know that these invisible monsters are going to radiate and take a photograph of what you can't see. We trust that those are real, but we can't trust the one that is making us sick. And so it's really interesting to see. And
yeah, I think The Exorcist and stuff like that, though, can actually still be prescient now in large part. I mean, I'm thinking about that, and so much of it had to do with the internal struggle that Father Karras had. And then also you've got Chris Nielsen, who was straight across the board atheist. And, she's having to come around to deal with the idea of, you do everything that you possibly can for your child. And this is someone who has resources, beyond what most of us could possibly have. And you have put all your faith in these things that you can see and that and science, and you expect that to solve the problem, and it doesn't. And you're ended up facing or required to rely upon something that you've spent your life saying is a lie. And I think that's an interesting, I think that's something that maybe is viewed from a different angle now, that maybe more people would identify with Chris than they would, with folks who would be very, I guess, just have a strong faith in it. But you've just got, you've got several facets of it. You have Karras struggling with his faith. You have I remember the actor's name, Max van Sydow, but what's the older,
Father Marin?
Thank you. Yes, Father Marin, who has a strong and unyielding faith. And so you've just got all these different facets. And, maybe it's just because I love it. And maybe it's just because I love the supernatural stories, but I just feel like it still has a great deal of impact.
I think so too. And I love you just from what you said. Okay. Fallen in love. That was some great stuff about The Exorcist. So because it hit on something that is a recurring nightmare that I have. And I forget about this recurring nightmare until it comes up. And it's all about growing up in that family that I grew up in. And I'm in an apartment, and I'm fully grown, and it's kind of nice lamps and everything, but it's kind of 70s style, all the wood paneling and stuff. And I have an old stereo system, and I'm playing music on the stereo, and it's just nice, whatever rock and roll I'm listening to. And I'm walking around my room, and all of a sudden the lights kind of dim. And you just have that thing that happens in nightmares where all of a sudden the room temperature changes by the light. It's like everything gets heavier. And all of a sudden I'm scared. And all of a sudden the record player starts to slow down. And so I start walking towards it, and something jumps me, something I can't see. And it's on me, and I can feel its breath on me, and it takes me to the ground. And in my head, the thing that's coming through my mind is, I've been wrong this whole time. They were right. And now I'm going to die right here. All this time I was a fool. And that's all the thing that's going through my mind. That's the recurring nightmare. And I'm so terrified, and it's laughing. It's got me. So it's just been hiding there.
And that's such a powerful image, in particular when you're talking about with the background that you have, which this is something that's interestingly feel like has been coming up lately. And it might be just, James, where the kind of books that are coming out right now. Todd Kiesling's Devil's Creek deals a lot with religion and sort of religious upbringing, you know, that he had in the town that he lived in, and, you know, just some other things. And we also had Hank Early, who writes, I guess it's more like noir sort of stuff, but he has a really great trilogy, an Earl Marcus series. And we had a conversation with him about it. And it's like just this, you know, it's this amazing, incredible opening to the first one where, you know, the main character, his father is they're in like a snake handling church. You know, and I'm from the South, and I'm in a bigger town, so we don't really have that, but you definitely, when you see them, you're like, you know, it's interesting because they're so preternatural. And it just opens with this just amazing, you know, it gets struck in the face, and it's so, you know, visceral.
Whoa.
And the conversation that we had with him too, and this is just something that I feel like keeps coming up. It is whatever people end up believing, and whatever they choose to teach their children, it is straight up criminal. It is cruel to create a situation in which, I mean, I feel like when you raise a kid and you have it be really harsh, and it's nothing but threats, then almost any child is going to grow up from that and say, fuck off. You know, that's not the life I want to live. All of this is horrible. This was a horrible upbringing. I'm not happy. And, you know, you build that wall. And, you know, I'm not going to say who's right and who isn't, but I just despise the idea. You know, again, I live in the Bible Belt, so I drive by these big billboards that say, what if it is true? And I'm like, well, that is like got to be the worst basis of fucking religion that I've ever heard of. Like, let's not appeal to anyone's intelligence. Let's not have a spirituality discussion. Let's say, well, you're going to burn if you don't do exactly what we say. And it's just like, you just build this atmosphere. And I feel like it's the cruelty, but
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's excellent. And it looks like we have the amazing John Ferris. We're going to give you a special dispensation from the church, John, not having your camera on, because I know you're having problems with it. Can you hear us? Can we hear you? We're not hearing you, John. If you can hear us.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, you may have to look down at the left-hand corner where there's a little microphone, and you might want to check on that little arrow that's there. It will show you what microphone and headphone is being used, and you're probably just going to one that isn't, you know, connected right now.
We'll see if he can.
Yeah, we'll see if we can. But yeah,
you get that worked out.
Yeah, Laurel, you're hitting on something that I think is very, very true, the idea of cruelty. One of the movies that gave me like heart palpitations when I watched, because it was so point on, it's a movie called Frailty by Bill Paxton. So spot on. The idea of saving people from themselves, hating the sin, not the sinner, which is just such a cop-out. And because as far as I know, the sin doesn't bleed. So I guess you still got to hurt the person to get to that sin, damn. Boy, it's just a terrible, you know, catch-22 for that person. And all that does is make the person who is the punisher feel as if it's okay to punish. You're giving carte blanche. It's like when Abu Ghraib hit, and we're like debating whether is torture okay, as opposed to just saying, no, torture is not okay ever. But it's like, well, maybe certain types of torture. I don't think there's any surprise that we ended up with torture porn after Abu Ghraib. And I think that we have this thing that happens with religion where we say, or any, I don't want to just say religion, but any belief system that says, you know, there is a time when, you know, you got to take, you know better than the other person, and you, whatever means necessary just to get them right in line is disturbing. And that movie hit so hard. Hey, Mary Kay, are we reaching the, I just realized, folks, we are at 2 hours and 50 minutes. So just like that, we've gone 3 hours. So I know that everybody is probably ready to fall asleep. So instead of going on and on and on, how about we have a little round of just everybody saying whatever they want to say at the end? Mary Kay, it looks like you're ready to head on out. So I didn't.
Oh yeah, I'm not really ready to head on out. I got an early morning, so I just.
Yeah, I mean, who's on the East Coast?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, thank y'all so much for having me. I had so much fun talking scary with you. And
yeah, this was amazing.
This was super fun, and I feel really special for having been invited. So,
Aw, you
Thank
are
you.
special.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your art. Thank you for your book.
thank you. It's nice to meet y'all too.
You too.
Folks. Fun.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
And
you.
anyone else? You guys just want to do a quick round and get out?
We could do a quick round and get out. We'll leave on a high note, right?
Yeah,
We don't
leave
want
on
to
a high
jump the
note.
shark.
Yeah, exactly. So, Laura,
Or the
you wanna-
Sharknado for the horror fans.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel just had a great time. I like. I'm kind of new to sort of dissecting film. I'm not. I'm someone who's pretty literal minded, so I haven't spent a lot of time breaking things down. But James actually, your show, the Necronoma.com, has helped me a lot with that. And y'all keep referencing Jaws. If you haven't listened to his episode with Jonathan Jans, every time they said it, I was like, but James, but you remember?
Oh, it was killing me not to do it. I'm like, it's our current episode,
I'll plug it for you, but there's so much to it. And Jonathan Jans is another one I would love to plug. He's a wonderful writer, excellent horror writer, and just such a nice person that you just want to be a better person after you talk to him.
He's
So
brilliant.
yeah, and he just breaks down Jaws like incredibly. So yeah, this was a lot of fun, and yeah, I really appreciate being invited.
Awesome. I'm so glad you joined us.
Yeah, it was a great time, and I'm so glad we got to talk about so many different writers. Anybody else you want to talk about, or any other book that excites you that just came to your mind?
Yeah, I just want to say really fast, Laurel just said that she's not good at breaking down film.
Uh-huh.
And she came on our show and did The Eclipse, which is an Irish film.
I love that movie.
You've seen it. I'm so psyched. I love that movie.
The book is really
I've never
good.
even heard of it, and I loved it so much. But she came on and she dissected the hell out of this film. So don't listen to her. She thinks that she's not good at it, but she is. So, and definitely check out Ink Heist, the podcast she's on with Shane Keane and Rich Duncan. It's great, and it's so cool because they go really into like writers and like just anything that writers are thinking, and it's so in depth and great. I love it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what you said because she totally nailed Poltergeist and The Exorcist.
See?
Thank you. I must be learning.
Yeah. You're an expert. I'm going to come to you with questions.
And Christopher, anything for you?
Or do you want Charlie to say it for you?
Yes. Do it.
Oh, I was kidding.
I'll be your best friend. Actually, what I want to say is like one thing that I definitely want to do, probably starting today through into the next year, is to read more. It's funny because like I make movies, I write scripts, but I really don't read enough, and I think reading is very fundamental, not only to storytelling, but also just to get your mind, in those juices of imagination.
Yeah.
Because when you read, you create your own movie in your mind, and that's why a lot of times people see the movie version like that's not the character I created in my head.
Right.
So that's what I love listening to you guys talk about in some of these books that you mentioned and stuff. It definitely makes me interested in reading more. Because I actually, my friend Amanda Stone, who's producer on Back of Creeper, we're writing the screenplay to the feature. She got mad at me because she writes novels, and I was like, I don't really read that much, and she got so mad at me. I was like, well, maybe I should read some more. So I thank you guys for this talk today because it's really sort of rejuvenated the fact that I need to read more.
Good.
That's
awesome.
Especially at my old age, because I need to get my brain working more.
The nice thing right now is there's so many novellas coming out, and I think that that's a really good way to read more because you don't have the commitment of a 700-page book. One of my favorite novellas of the last year was Alan Baxter's The Rue.
Yes, The Rue.
What is The Rue, everyone? Oh, this book is about a crazed kangaroo just going around slaughtering people. And it's amazing. But at the same time, what I liked about it is I was able to finish it in one sitting. You know, and that's really played a huge part in my ability to read more, or my desire to read more. I don't know about anyone else here, but I do a lot of beta reading for authors. So I have this weird world I live in where I don't even know if the book I read is still that book, because I don't normally reread it when it comes out.
Right.
But like, I'll ask somebody, I'll be like, hey, did so-and-so put this line in the book? Because, you know, I loved that line and I just want to know if it's still there, you know, or this scene or things like that. And so because I spend so much time doing that for other authors or as a side gig, I don't have a lot of time to knock out the new Stephen King book at 1,100 pages or whatever it is these days. And so novellas have been really, really helpful with that. So when you were saying you want to read more, I just think that's an excellent place to start, because some of them are like 100 pages. And so like you'll just like get this rhythm going with novellas, and that might be a great way to start.
We'll give you a reading list.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, no.
I think we've got a hell of a lot of reading
You've
lists.
got homework.
Hate homework.
But it's okay, because I do too.
Well, I love reading. You know, it saved my life. You know, at a certain point, being in a poverty level place in the coal mine town of Pennsylvania, the Hazleton Public Library, getting a library card was a big deal. 7 books, bring them home. 2 weeks, go. And having a friend who was a big reader, and the rest of the world sucked for both of us. And so he just started the science fiction, you know, at A, and found Asimov and just went all the way through, made it through all of the hard science fiction, which was really interesting, and seeing the difference in that. And then me going through horror, because that was so important to me, and just how enriching that was. And what I love about reading, and I don't do enough of it now. Now a lot of it, because for the longest time I had 2-hour drives in both directions for work, and then long days. It was books on tape. So I was getting a voice of a voice, and I'm not getting the book. But reading a book is kind of like finding the director of a film. Many times it's the voice, like Vonnegut. If you read Vonnegut, there's only one Vonnegut. And when you read his stuff, it's like a Robert Altman film. You know an Altman film when you see it. You know a Vonnegut book when you read it. And there are people who are fun to read, even if the story's not great. It's okay. It has to at least be okay. But the writer, the voice of the writer, can be really enjoyable and get you through. David Wong. Has anybody read John Dies in the End, or What the Fuck Am I Reading?
I've just seen the movie, but I want to read the book.
Both of them. They are wonderfully, and these are, I think both of his books were like self-published. I think they were just found, and they've become these great cult hits because he's a writer who has kind of a just don't care kind of thing to him. And the writing is, I can't tell you what the stories are. That's what's funny. They're great in their own way. They've got so many great ideas, but if you really boil it down, it's just two stoners who have to save the world. and that's either funny to you, it's either two Big Lebowski people going through life, or it's not that fun to you. But the story, the drive that he has, the sense of humor and timing is just amazing. And I think that sometimes that's the great joy of falling into a book. I love John Irving. He's an acquired taste because he goes on fucking forever. But I could listen to him talk about tattoos all day. And the one book that, Garp is amazing, but Prayer for Owen Meany is some weird ass fucking masterpiece that is almost impossible, if you don't get into it, to crack. But once it's under your skin, you can't get away from it. I don't think a movie could ever do that. I don't think a TV show could ever do that. Play could never do that. A book can. And that's what I think is so special about books. These voices can come out of nowhere and still grab you. Anything from you, Vanessa?
It was awesome. This is what happens at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Well,
I run out of the words and the flair and the funny.
The flair and the funny.
And the funny.
I really appreciate everybody coming on. Thank you so much. And please, everybody, put your links in the Facebook chat or in here, and we'll see about transporting it over there, because we want you to be seen and heard and read. And anybody that's out there still watching, thanks so much for taking the time to spend 3 hours with us. It goes fast. Sometimes it just goes fast and everything's fun. And until next time, thank you, and stay hell bent.